The armor on the ranged warden was slimmer and less thickly made. The idea was for it to be agile and keep itself on target with its weapon. All 4 wardens went heads up at the call. Both shield wardens trundled forward, their swords held out at their sides as their counterparts brought their railguns to bear. The armored cars screeched into the area and the back hatch dropped down. Shit! Supers flooded out of the dropped gate, the cannons on the armored cars opened up, and the security hall was filled with enemy troops. Andrea, send the others!
On it!
Andrea pressed a hand to her ear and turned her head to one side. His people lit those armored cars up like they were range targets. The camera started to fritz as the armored cars continued to boom out round after heavy-caliber round. The supers took cover behind the armored cars and began organizing themselves quickly. His shield wardens got into place and neatly snipped the tips off the barrels from each of the armored cars. The barrels melted from where they were struck, the red-hot glow deforming them. The next round from one of them exploded in the damaged barrel, while the other one failed to fire at all. A Gauss round tore through a super who tried to get a peek around the armored car, his head disappearing in a splatter of gore. Then everything went to shit as the others flooded in from the sides. Felix simply couldn't keep up with what was going on as the whole thing devolved into chaos. Hitting the comm button, he dialed into the shield wardens. "More coming down the security hall. Hold them there and keep them out. We need time to deal with the supers." He got 2 acknowledgments in return as the shield wardens turned off to face the tunnel. Lightning crackled one way, then fire in the opposite direction. Explosions detonated throughout the room as the battle raged. Telemedics popped up here and there as they were able to, vanishing with a wounded comrade. Feeling the weight of his lack of combat experience again, Felix had to turn to Andrea for help. "How's it looking?" "I'm no strategist, Andrea. I'm just a pencil pusher." Andrea glanced over at him, her mismatched eyes piercing through him. She gave him a warm smile, then looked back to the monitors.
"We're winning, but not without losses. It shouldn't be much longer. It just looks like this because everyone is unleashing all their trump cards. Lily is scary as shit. I genuinely underestimated her."
Felix couldn't tell what she was talking about, but if he had to guess, it was the mass of lightning that was dominating one side of the room. "Yeah, she hides the monster well."
"As to being a pencil pusher, that's okay, dear. You be you, you do you. You're not here to fight, you're here to help us fight. I enjoy the idea that you depend on us for your safety. It's not every day we get to rescue the damsel in distress. You'd look terrible in a dress, though."
Yes, I would. I'll leave that to you and Lily. You two have certainly set a new standard for attractive and professional."
"You flatter me. Do it some more."
Felix frowned for a moment as he watched the mess that was the screen. Andrea changed whenever she flipped her myriad switch, almost to another person. The intelligence boost only made it more obvious. Might as well ask, I guess. "You're like a different person." Andrea blinked twice, her eyes unfocusing. She gave herself a tiny shake of her head, her eyes flicking back to the monitors.
"That's because I am. I'm me, of course, but the one you call Andrea Prime isn't Andrea Prime. I died, and we absorbed ourselves through our oldest other. We are Andrea, yet we are... I am not."
Andrea's eyes scrunched up, and she looked pained.
"This isn't easy to explain, and I'm making a mess of it."
No, I get it. I get it. It also makes a bit more sense. We'll talk more after this. I'd like to ask some questions about your others, and Death Others, too."
"Good, because this thing is over and we need to get down there to start picking up the dead and wounded."
Felix looked up to the screens and found she was right. The wardens were holding the hallway, while the center of the screen was a bloody mess. Not quite. We still have to clear the lobby, and whatever they've laid in wait for us outside. "This isn't over, I'm afraid," Felix said morosely. Chapter 25. Clearing the Field.
"I object to this. There's no reason to put yourself in harm's way,"
Miyu said sternly, trailing at Felix's heel. "Noted. But I really think I should be down there. So I'm going."
"I don't like it. I don't like it at all. What if you get hurt?"
Miyu's voice had changed pitch entirely, her voice bordering on breaking. "Really, it'll be fine. Everyone is there. I'll stay back, but there's nothing I can see from the control room that'll help me. Miyu's breathing became irregular, rapidly speeding up over the course of 10 seconds. Then, suddenly, it returned to normal, the sound of it being replaced by the sound of their shoes striking the floor. Andrea skipped ahead and thumbed the elevator button.
It's okay, Miyu. Everyone up there wants him to live as much as we do.
Pressing her back to the frame of the elevator, Andrea pulled out her tablet and started to tap her screen. You all right, Miyu? Felix asked, turning his head to Miyu.
Yes, I'm fine. I don't like you risking yourself. It's troubling. You risk everyone.
He couldn't exactly disagree with her. She wasn't wrong, but nor did he really want to sit back the entire time and do nothing. Her reaction was also pretty strange. I get that. I promise I won't take unnecessary risks.
I'll kill anyone who gets close to you.
I don't think you need to go to that extreme, but please do watch over me. I'm in your care. Felix gave her a smirk. The elevator chimed, and all three entered. Nothing was said as they rode the elevator up. With the chime, the elevator stopped and opened into a landing behind the security hall's opening lobby. This was meant as a fallback position and sheltered enclave to take wounded. And wounded there were. Laid out all around were his wounded, those who suffered so that Felix could remain in power. Telemedics, medics, and doctors were working through everyone there. It was clear the truly worse off had been triaged to the medical facility, the rest being held here. More of Felicia's beds would be needed in the immediate future, when resources were available. Heads turned his way as he exited the elevator. Blood-stained and weary, they looked to him. I appreciate your service. All of you. You will receive the best care to put you back to rights in every way possible. I will personally make sure you all are healthy, mentally and physically. There isn't anything I cannot fix given a day or two. Heads nodded slightly, fingers unclenched from sheets, eyes softened. Let our very talented medical staff take care of everything they can, and everything that's beyond the purview of modern medicine will fall to me. Trust in your peers. Trust in Legion. Felix bowed his head to everyone, then moved on. Turning the corner, it was like walking into a slaughterhouse. Bodies, body parts, and blood were liberally smeared over and on everything and everyone. It looked as if a massacre had taken place. Meeting the eyes of anyone who looked his way, Felix refused to turn away from them. This was all for him and everyone in Legion. He'd feel shame to not meet their gaze. Lily and Ioana were organizing what he could only guess was a counteroffensive near a back wall. Before he even made it halfway across the room, a bubble of protective magic snapped into place around him.
Felix!
Lily shouted, jogging towards him. Her corporate attire was gone, and in its place was tactical gear the likes of which he saw many of his people wearing. It gave her a different look, especially with her hair pulled back into a tight bun behind her head.
What in the seven hells are you doing here? Miyu, I thought we agreed to keep him out of this.
Lily turned her glare on the woman who had escorted him here.
He overruled me. I pleaded with him.
She did, and I did. I'm here. Deal with it. Might I also say you look rather fetching? Felix tried for distracting her. It worked elsewhere. Why not here?
What? Don't be stupid. Fine, you're here. Come. You're staying with me and Ioana for now.
Lily turned around and headed back towards Ioana. She started talking into what he guessed was her mic to someone else. Miyu, Andrea, and Lily escorted him to Ioana, who gave him a death stare down the bridge of her nose.
You are not to be here, Felix. Your strength lies elsewhere,
said War Maiden, speaking from her old persona to the inch of it. I know, Ioana, I know. But I couldn't sit back and not show up at this point. Not after everyone already fought and bled for me. I can't. I won't. Ioana narrowed her eyes, then suddenly nodded her head.
Good. I dislike you being here, but your reasons are good. Stand beside me.
Ioana turned her head and snapped her fingers and pointed at someone in the crowd. Felix wasn't tall enough to see over the sea of heads and bodies. Then Victoria appeared, garbed in her lightweight tactical vest and sword baldric. She was very similar to Kit in build and body type. Athletic supermodel sprang to his mind as a good definition. Tall and lanky, she had a body that looked lithe and swift. She was also rather pretty. Not as striking as Lily or girl next door as Andrea, but definitely pretty. Certainly above the average. Her hair was pulled back from her face in a similar style as Lily's, though a few dark brown curls had slipped free. Probably when she got turned into a Christmas tree. Large dark green eyes peered at him, her face turning a light pink in tone, her lightly tanned skin darkening. Victoria stood in front of Ioana and went to attention.
You're on guard duty under Miu. Keep Felix here out of trouble.
Ioana jerked a thumb at Felix as she spoke. After having given the order, she turned back to the people she'd been working with when he'd arrived.
Felix?
Victoria said softly, her eyes locking onto him. Hey, sorry for ending up as my babysitter. I couldn't sit behind and wait.
You're on point. I'll take the rear. Remain at his side,
Miu said from behind him.
Of course, Miu.
Victoria bobbed her head, not taking her eyes off Felix. Felix gave her a smile and then turned his attention to what was going on around him. Teams of supers were working to haul the damaged armored cars out of the open area and to one side. He imagined Felicia would get them to a garage somehow and rebuild them. She enjoyed those kinds of projects.
Idiot! What are you doing up here? Don't you know your place? I know mine, and it sure as hell ain't here,
grumped the woman he'd just been thinking about. Meeting Felicia's stare, Felix couldn't help but smile. Oh there, friend dwarf. If this isn't your place, what are you doing up here?
Doing your little princess a favor. She called me all worried about you getting your dainty ass hurt. Your Mark II armor is this way.
Felicia did an about-face and marched over to where a team of her people were unpacking. Felix was surprised. Mark II? From those boxes and crates, a suit of armor emerged. One that looked nothing like the set he'd worn previously. This one looked more between the first suit, an exoframe, and the Warden. Pretty sure I'm not going to Mars to slay aliens or anything. So what's up with the spaceman?
Shut up!
Felicia slapped a hand onto his wrist and jerked him closer.
Stand there and be silent. We'll get you outfitted. We've already put the pod in your room. That'll strip you of the armor and put it back on when you're ready. The Mark II isn't completely done, but all that's left is getting the heads-up display debugged. It has a couple graphical glitches, but that's it.
Felix grunted and did as instructed. There was no point arguing with them. He'd either end up ordering them to stop and pissing them off on a whole new level, or letting them do as they wished. The latter option was easier. He did as they asked, letting them guide him along the process. They had him step into the heavy boots and greaves first. Judging by those alone, it looked like this suit would completely cover him from head to toe. Around him, Ioana and her team were getting ready, arming themselves and making plans with Lily's team. The two groups were starting to work very well together. Training had definitely set the foundation for them, but nothing worked better than live first-hand experience. Chin up! A male tech prodded Felix in the jaw. Lifting his chin, the tech pulled a helmet down over Felix's head. The helmet was depowered and dark, giving him a view of absolute blackness. Then the screen in front of his eyes popped on and flickered before stabilizing. Amazingly enough, it was as if he were looking through holes in the helmet.
Damn, that's impressive. Volume's a little low. You'll need to key that up. The helmet is tied into the electric impulses your brain puts out, so think about moving the volume up. As to the suit, my team thanks you. I'll relay to them your appreciation of their efforts. I'll be sure to remind you about this when budget time rolls around,
said Felicia. Felix chuckled at that and mentally thought about turning up the volume as she'd suggested.
Mr. White is a smart man, but he's more built for outfitting a mass of people. My team and I are better at one-offs, or stuff like your damned wardens. We downloaded the footage from them, by the way, and we'll be going over it later for improvements. Anyways, don't get killed. We're done here. Tell your princess to stop worrying.
Felicia waved a hand at him over her head and left. As she went, she stopped next to Ioana. The big warrior looked down at the dwarf, then gave her a truly kind smile. Ioana and Felicia shared a quick kiss, then separated, both going their separate ways.
Ha! Good for them. They make a great couple,
Felix said. He'd been trying to keep his voice down, but apparently he'd pushed the volume up way too high. Every head in the room turned to him, including Ioana and Felicia, at what to them had been a shout. Ioana gave him a frozen, wide-eyed gaze, while Felicia grinned at him.
What?
Felix said, the helmet turning it into a shout. Something slammed into his helmet, the servos in the neck whining under the impact.
Lower the volume, stupid,
Miyu told him. Felix mentally tried adjusting the volume again.
How about now?
Better. It'll do.
Felix shook his head in annoyance and looked around. It was strange. He knew he wasn't looking at things, but at a display. Yet everything looked normal, as if he were simply looking through eye holes. Reaching up, he waved his fingers in front of the faceplate. Whipping them back and forth quickly, he saw no delay from action to visual relay.
Huh. She outdid herself. A lot. Remind me to see what she wants as a reward.
You give rewards?
Felix turned his head to find it was Victoria asking him the question.
Why wouldn't I? Best way to encourage people is with rewards. Only a fool thinks that the stick is the only way to motivate people. Luckily, I'm the owner of our experiment, so I don't have to run anything through anyone.
Turning back to the security hall, he saw the wardens moving out. They were lined up 2 by 2, moving at a pace equivalent to an easy jog for a human.
They're impressive,
Victoria said softly.
Yeah, they are. I told Felicia I want one for my own use, but with replaceable power units. She's working on it. I imagine this suit was a prototype that came before the warden. She probably just built it halfway and then left it.
You want a warden?
Asked the swordswoman.
Of course. I mean, shit. What kid didn't grow up saying they wanted a mech? Didn't you?
Yeah, I guess you're right.
I mean, what if we made a super lightweight one that was built around using an elongated sword?
Victoria fell silent at that. Felix started walking forward, taking up position behind the last team entering the security hall.
Felix, no, stop. You can't. You said you'd stay back,
Miyu said, her hands clamping around one of his arms. Her voice wasn't as firm as it normally was.
And I will stay back. Just not back here. Come on, Miyu. Between you, Victoria, and this suit, I'll be fine.
Felix kept walking, the servos and powered limbs not even slowing down despite Miyu's immense strength.
Damn it, Felix!
Miyu cursed. Moving in front of him, the diminutive and deceptively deadly woman kept herself alert.
Fine. You'll remain in the entryway and not a step beyond, or I will finally join Lily in turning Andrea on you.
Andrea made a chirping sound behind him.
Turning me on him how?
That drew Felix up short.
I understand. I will obey,
he said automatically. The wardens split off into the lobby up ahead. The individual teams that Lily and Ioana had put together broke off to assist in clearing the room. After a minute, Ioana held up her hand in the center of the room.
Clear! Move to the exterior and sweep.
Intricate glowing runes filled the doorway leading to the outside. Flowing script swooped and circled endlessly as Lily called it forth into being. As his people marched through the door and the runes, blue glowing shields wrapped around them. The wardens were too big to exit through the lobby door, so instead they took up defensive positions in the lobby. Team after team filtered out the door till only Ioana and Lily remained of the assault group. After a minute, Felix started to worry. Then Ioana turned her head to one side, her hand pressing to her ear. Nodding her head, she looked to Lily, who held up her hands in an, I don't know, gesture. Ioana swiveled her head to Felix.
Nothing out there. There's signs that the entire street was full of combatants, and the pawn shop across the street is a ruin. But that's about it.
Felix let out a breath and relaxed.
Good. This is over then. Let's see about purchasing all the buildings on this street and get it all locked down. Lily, please let me know how much money we'll need and I'll get that together. I'd like to do this quietly and without people realizing we own everything, if possible. Money isn't an issue there either, so... yeah, just let me know how much we need.
Felix nodded to Ioana.
You're on duty to make sure this area is a fortress. I don't want this happening again. Our defense is held, but I don't like it. Work with Felicia and her team to get it set up. Multiple fallback points, security bulkheads, traps, turrets, mines, whatever. And if we need something that we can't provide, I'll use points to get it done.
Shaking his head, Felix turned back to the security hall and went back into his complex. He needed to get out of his armor and to get to the medical wing. There were injured and wounded people who would need to see him. First, those Death Others and our guests. Andrea, I want to meet your Death Others. Let's get me out of the suit and head there. Miyu, go take care of your teams. I'll be fine from here on out.
I understand. Victoria, you are now on detached duty to Felix for the day. Felix will not give you orders to the contrary, or my earlier threat will be carried out.
Fine. She can come. So grumpy.
Understood,
Victoria said loudly. It took him 30 minutes to figure out how to get out of his new powered armor. He didn't deny it was exactly what he needed to stay safe, but he still didn't like being closed up in it. It was pretty frickin' cool, though, by his own estimation. The armor made him actually feel like a superhero instead of a manager. The elevator doors pinged open into the sausage room. Hard-faced Andreas looked up from around the room. They all wore different clothing in different styles and tastes. Every single one of them bore Andrea's face, but not all of them were Andrea. They weren't even an other. They were all battle-scarred. A number of them looked like they'd been burned, shot, broken, or worse. Before Felix could do or say anything, Andrea stepped out in front of him and immediately crossed the space between the two groups.
Hello! Thank you all for coming. Thank you for helping out. It wasn't my goal originally, but things happened.
Andrea wrung her hands in front of herself, her tail hanging low between her legs.
I want to start by saying sorry. You all volunteered for your burden, and I allowed you to take it. That doesn't make it right, or any better.
The Death Others had taken a few steps back from Andrea when she'd entered. He finally came up with a reasonable assumption that made sense as to why. They weren't afraid of her. They were afraid for her. Absorbing them would bring back everything they had taken on themselves to begin with. Their sacrifice would be nullified. Andrea trailed off, her head dipping down. Felix cleared his throat and stepped up beside Andrea. Setting his hand on her shoulder, he gave it a light squeeze. I'm Felix. Felix Campbell. Andrea is my slave. She's been my trusted lieutenant as both Myriad and herself. She's also my friend. I have the power to modify the abilities of any person I own at a cost. Andrea asked me for only one thing: to be able to selectively choose what memories come back to her when she absorbs another. I granted that wish. Felix gave the Death Others his best smile, trying to meet the eyes of each one. To that end, one of the first things Andrea did after getting that power was to call all of you. I believe she wants to ask if you'd be willing to return to her and rejoin the Andrea Collective. She'd probably weed out any and all memories neither of you want, and you'd simply return to being another. Please keep in mind that Andrea is still a slave, and if you were to rejoin her, you would become a slave as well. Felix released Andrea and stepped back into the elevator. Putting his foot in front of the door so it wouldn't close, he continued, I'll have a conference room set up in 10 minutes for you to discuss this situation at length. I'll also have food and drink sent up, as well as Andrea's mini traveling kitchen if you suddenly decide you want pancakes. A number of Death Others smiled at that. At least a little. Pulling his foot out of the door, the elevator dinged and closed. Felix sighed and hit the button for his office. He'd need to go book a room and move some things around for them to get what he had promised.
You can modify powers? I mean, we've heard about it, but hearing it from you directly...
Victoria said slowly, as if she wasn't sure she wanted to say anything at all. You're alive, aren't you? You got turned into a goddamn light bulb. You should be dead.
I was dying, wasn't I? I was. My heart... It hurts so bad.
Felix moved his head a fraction to catch Victoria out of the side of his eyes. She looked pale. Yeah, you were dying. Fixed you all up, though. Good as new. No damage at all. Victoria shook her head, and then smiled.
You saved me.
Of course. Why wouldn't I?
Chapter 26. Smith. Looking up from his office terminal, he saw Andrea standing in the doorframe.
How'd it go?
Felix turned his eyes back to the spreadsheet. Lily had sent him over the finances involved with purchasing out the entire street. Only the 2 stores on each side of his own refused to even discuss the matter. Nor did they owe anything, giving them no leverage at all over them.
They really did open them up just to get us. Next, we'll need to find out if they had any involvement with this attack. If they did, I'll send a herd of Andreas over there.
They're all with me again. We are thankful.
Ha. Good. I kind of figured they would rejoin you. I can't imagine a reason why they'd stay. You all cleaned up then? No death memories?
None. We kept all of our memories outside of the deaths. They are not all pretty, but they are us.
I've heard that before. Or something to that effect. The sum of what we are, our experience, is what we draw upon to make choices. It's what we use to defend ourselves from doubt. We compare them to things we've done previously and judge it based on what the outcome had been then. Or so I remember it as.
Felix closed the spreadsheet, pulled open Lily's email, and gave her a quick reply. Sending it off, he locked his terminal and turned his attention on Andrea.
They had many questions, mostly about you.
Oh? That's surprising. I thought they'd want to know more about what memories you'd strip from them.
No, we share memories, for we are but one person. It's complicated.
I suppose it is at that.
Andrea came in from the doorway, walking his way slowly. She'd changed out of her normal corporate attire and was in a tight pair of jeans and a tank top. It was very much not in her normal style. Andrea had that girl-next-door thing down to a science. This was more like...
Lily? Well, is there anything else you need? Actually, before you answer that, I had a question. If another is wearing clothes, where do they go? And gear? Say, if they had a knife?
Andrea came up to stand directly in front of his desk. Placing her hands on the wood, she leaned forward over it. Felix kept his eyes fastened on her face, her different-colored eyes.
Any fabric goes somewhere. Everything else ends up on the ground. We can recall the fabric from wherever it goes so our others are dressed.
Oh. How odd,
Felix said, leaning back in his chair, away from Andrea. He was well aware of the women around him, aware of their appeal. He wasn't stupid to think that they wanted anything from him like an actual relationship, though. They all had their own moments where they teased or flirted, but that was where it would end, and he knew it.
We should build an Andrea armory, where you can store all your others' gear. That way they can arm up and move quickly.
Andrea tilted her head to one side, her hair cascading down to one side. Her ears twitched on the top of her head, swiveling backwards and then forwards towards him. Then her nose twitched as she made an audible sniffing noise.
How many others do you have, exactly?
Felix reached over and thumbed his terminal to life. He opened up an email to Felicia and started writing a quick letter about creating an armory for Andrea and her others.
300 or so now?
Felix entered that it'd need to hold 300 sets of full tactical gear and sent the email. Andrea sat down in his lap, her tail moving up to press to the side of his shoulder and neck.
You're not paying attention to me,
she growled under her breath. Felix's head snapped to her, his eyes catching yellow, flickering irises.
Never seen that one before.
With the return of our death others, we've realized a few things when we went over our memories. You keep me at a distance. You smell of desire and longing, yet do not touch. You watch me, roll your eyes over me. You even watch me at night sometimes.
Felix's eyebrows went up slowly, till it felt like they were in his damn hairline. She wasn't wrong, of course. He was only human, and he hadn't gotten laid since before this whole thing had started. Saying he had blue balls would have been an understatement. Honesty would do the best for him here. What can I say? You're right. It would be wrong, as you're a slave and I'm your master. Andrea chortled, and her eyes flashed again. Reaching up, she poked him in the forehead.
I'm not as smart as the others, but I know this. I will mate as I will mate when I mate. No one will tell me otherwise. You are the alpha. I can accept sharing you with others, but I cannot accept you saying no.
Andrea patted him on the chest and then got up off his lap.
I'm going to call all my others in tonight. I'll let Miyu and Ioana know about the gap.
Leaving his office by going into his attached bedroom, she disappeared without another word. Okay, then. I'll just finish up here and go to bed, I guess. Felix scratched at his cheek. There was a certain amount of excitement in his head. And his other head. He was only human, after all. At that moment, his phone went off. Clicking his teeth shut, he looked at the display. The fact that the name came up at all on the display was simple pride on their part. Agent Smith, Felix muttered. Hitting the accept button, Felix pulled the phone up to his ear. Agent Smith, Felix said again, now for the benefit of his caller.
Mr. Campbell, I'm so glad to have gotten a hold of you.
I don't remember giving you this number.
You didn't, but that's okay. I heard you had some guests earlier today.
Felix felt the hairs on his neck stand up on end. Was Smith involved in this? We did. They were escorted off the premises.
Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. Unrelated, there was a real problem with the emergency circuits today. Apparently, a huge number of emergency calls and emails didn't get through today.
Uh-huh. I imagine. A real shame. I hope no one had a problem with the lack of emergency services.
No. The problem was a very small area, apparently. About a street long.
I see. So, other than local news, to what do I owe the pleasure?
Oh, nothing really. Just wondering if you'd thought on my offer.
Not really. I'll be honest with you, I haven't thought of you since you left.
For shame. Well, I'll be by next week to see how things are going. Check on your slaves. Collect. You know, government job and all.
Goody.
With that settled, I'll see you then. Good evening.
The click of the agent hanging up was all Felix heard. Setting his phone down, Felix contemplated the situation. Then his door opened, and others began marching by. They were all dressed in street clothes, most of them wearing jeans and a t-shirt, with very little diversity. Each and every one of them made eye contact with him as they went by, though, their cheeks turning a pale red and their eyes flashing yellow at the center as he met their eyes. They all filed into his bedroom, a never-ending train of them. The last Andrea entered the office, turned, closed the door, locked it, and then entered the bedroom. Watching her go, he waited for her to vanish from sight, and then he opened an email to Lily. He filled her in on everything that had just happened with Agent Smith and his questions and concerns, then sent it. If anyone could figure out what was going on, it'd be Lily. Getting up, he wandered over to his bedroom as casually as he could make himself be. The door was already open, and inside was a trio of Andreas, waiting for him. This'll be fun, I think. A week passed in the blink of an eye. Felix spent most of that time either making gold or putting his people back to rights. They'd only lost a few people in that final push. Missing limbs, blinded, mental problems, everything was swept away under an onslaught of spent points. He was also well aware of what that did for his reputation. Everyone began treating him as something much greater than a mere employer. They all treated him like he was their personal superhero. That nothing was too great for Felix. That if for whatever reason something failed, Felix would be there to fix it. Personally, Felix ignored it. He had other things to worry about. like the fact that their assets had been frozen and they couldn't access anything electronically that was directly tied into Legion. That was a pretty big worry right now. They'd only been tied up for 2 days, but it was already enough to be a problem. Lily had her entire team jumping through hoops to get it all figured out and sorted, but for the most part it seemed as if it was a government hold, which really only left Agent Smith. No one else knew them or had even tried to put any pressure on them from a government position. "Now I don't feel so bad about sending Wraith after them," Felix said, leaning back in the chair in front of his personal computer. Wraith, the incorporeal shadow hero they'd captured, had signed on as an indentured servant. It was that or get whatever, soul ripped out and stuffed into the sausage machine. Since Wraith had never revealed their form, Felix wasn't even sure how to address them. Not that he cared how to address them. They were Wraith. That was all that mattered at the moment. And at that moment, they were infiltrating Agent Smith's organization and doing a bit of intel gathering. The speedy guy and Tanker had both declined his generous offer. For some reason, they had seemed to think he wasn't going to go through with killing them. Felix wasn't your average cliché villain, though. He did what he said he would do. Tanker had been turned into mini sausages. Most of the enemy captured prisoners had been in fact dumped into the machine after having their soul stripped, just like Tanker. After they'd all been thoroughly interrogated, of course. Any who were willing to sign a contract were given a chance and were being put through their paces.
"Why would you?"
asked Victoria. She rarely left his side now. After Miyu had attached Victoria to him, Miyu had taken a back seat and was working with her team more frequently. "Dunno. Seems rude to do that to someone who up to this point has genuinely only been annoying rather than a problem." Felix interlaced his fingers behind his head. "Whatever. Wraith will figure out what they can and report back. I think Lily said she was expecting something today or tomorrow."
"She did,"
Andrea chirped happily at his side. She tapped at her tablet and then nodded her head.
"She has another meeting tomorrow with you."
Victoria took a number of steps to one side and then paced back the other way. Her sword clicked as she turned and started back the other way. "Stop pacing."
"Sorry. I'm not used to this yet. I was just on a security team a bit ago, and now I'm protecting you."
"It's been a week already."
"And? Still not used to it."
"Whatever. Take a seat or Lily is going to be annoyed. Miyu would tell you to post up near the door." "Probably."
"She would,"
Andrea confirmed. Her eyes peered at him for a second over the top of her tablet. She'd changed since they actually started sleeping with each other. She was her normal and chipper self. She touched him casually a little more often, but nothing obvious. Then there were times where she touched him when they were alone somewhere, times when her touch was far more intimate. The door opened, and Lily entered. She was dressed in a dark black jacket, white blouse, and dark black pencil skirt. Her hair was tied back in her professional style, though most surprising was that she was wearing glasses.
"Agent Smith should be arriving in 15 minutes.
Lily crossed the distance to where he sat at the conference table and dropped into the chair next to him at his left side.
"Andy? Vicky?"
Both women nodded their head to Lily. Felix quirked a brow, smiling at Lily. Reaching up, she adjusted her hair with a touch and then looked down at herself. Looking back up to him, she frowned.
"What? You're looking at me in a strange way. And not in the normal stripping me of my clothes and devouring me way."
Felix snorted and reached out. He pushed her glasses up higher on the bridge of her nose. "Didn't realize you had a prescription. And how would you know what I do to you in my mind while looking at you?" Lily pressed her lips together into a line.
"Yes, I'm a bit nearsighted. I ran out of contacts and forgot to order more."
"Wear the glasses more often. Your eyes are lovely. It brings the focus on them." Lily smiled at him, then looked to Andrea over his shoulder.
"He's been much more of a smooth talker since you tamed him."
Andrea chuckled, not arguing the point. Felix wasn't quite sure how he felt about the fact that everyone knew Andrea and he were sleeping together.
"Anyways, my eyes aren't the topic, though thank you for the compliment. Agent Smith is definitely the reason we're all tied up financially. I also found out what's going on with that slave tax baloney."
"Baloney?"
Complete baloney. Yes, there will be a tax, but it isn't being put into place for a while yet. They're still going through the assessment phase. He's trying to shake us down. The freeze on our assets is probably part of a tool set to help them determine what we should be paying when the tax goes live. Best I can tell, it'll be repealed tonight.
Huh. Good work. How'd you find all this out?
Wraith and our police informant. Doesn't hurt that we kept all that petty cash on hand. I've been using it to grease wheels. We'll need more.
You know what, Lily? You're fantastic. I cannot imagine Legion without you.
You still owe me, remember? Now you owe me 2 nice things. Spoil me already.
Fine, whatever. 2 favors of your choosing. Get it put down in a meeting and we'll take care of it. No limit, except anything along the lines of free me, 'cause that ain't gonna happen. Sorry, too valuable. Lily lifted up a hand with one finger held up. Her shoulders were set and her body had gone rigid.
Anything?
Well, anything within reason. But yeah, I can promise to be receptive to whatever you ask.
I'll hold you to that. We can talk after this meeting. I do have a favor already in mind. I've been working on getting it set up. One of the reasons I didn't bother you about it yet. I finally got most of it taken care of.
Felix was curious now. He really didn't know much about Lily. She kept to herself when it came to her past, and about herself in general. You damn tease. That's all you're going to say, isn't it? Lily's tension melted away in a heartbeat, replaced with the vibrant, soul-stealing monster.
Of course. I have to keep you coming back for more. Ever since you started playing bedroom games with your wolf over there, you don't pay me as much attention.
Andrea started giggling at that.
Bedroom games? There's lots of games. We're having lunch tomorrow, aren't we? Uh-huh. You promised me a different type of pancake. Creepies or something. Crepes, but yes. Not quite pancakes, but similar enough. We'll talk about games then. We haven't talked recently. I think our little leader here has been trying to keep you away from me. No, just busy. We were setting up the other armory.
Felix sighed and looked to Victoria as the two kept chatting. As you can see, I'm a passenger most of the time. Just along for the ride. The swordswoman shrugged her shoulders.
Most of us kinda assumed you were already sleeping with Lily and Andrea. There's even a pool going as to how big you're going to make your harem and who's next.
A pool? Seriously?
It's not that surprising. People bet on anything. And you do kinda own everyone.
Huh. So, who's in the lead in the pool right now? Maybe I can swing it in my favor with a rumor and split the payout with the person.
That is...
She started. What, Kit? Iowana? I mean, seriously. Iowana isn't my type, and she's with Felicia. Kit? Don't get me wrong, she's pretty, but she's a touch on the Girl Scout side for what I do for that to work.
Right now, it's me. I spend the most time with you among anyone in your senior leadership circle. I'm at the top of the pool.
That's unexpected. I mean, you're definitely in my strike zone, but we just met a week ago. Felix shook his head. He never quite understood how people perceived relationships in that fashion. He tried to deal with everything from a black and white perspective. Relationships were very much not black or white.
Then I gagged and almost threw up,
Andrea said sadly.
You need to practice first.
Lily shifted in her chair and leaned towards Andrea. Felix sat up straight and jumped into their conversation. Yeah, no, that conversation is over. Let's get ready for Smith, Felix said quickly, slapping his palms to the table. It was one thing for everyone to know he was sleeping with Andrea. It was altogether too much for him when they discussed their sex life aloud as if it were polite dinner conversation. He turned a full glare on Andrea, who only smiled at him. She lifted her tablet up in front of her face, only covering her nose and mouth, her eyes watching him. Seriously, is there anything I need to know? Lily shook her head and then lifted her hands up in surrender.
Realistically, there's not much more we can do but wait to talk to him. We can't do anything more till then.
Andrea tapped her tablet and Lily's chimed in response. Lily picked her tablet up, tapped at it, then laughed.
Oh my God. They're sending messages about it since I told them to stop talking.
Chapter 27. Favors. The conference phone in the center of the table started to ring. Felix quirked a brow, forgetting Lily and Andrea altogether. Tapping the accept button, he leaned over the speaker.
This is Felix.
Mr. Campbell, I have Agent Smith on the line. I believe we were expecting him in person, but he's trying to call in,
came back the Andrea secretary's voice.
All right. Patch him through then.
Felix didn't care for this. It felt weird and didn't make that much sense to him. Smith had set this meeting up and had asked for it to be in person. Tapping the mute button, he looked around the room.
This isn't right. Lily, any chance you can get a report from Wraith as soon as possible?
Lily nodded her head at that, already working in her tablet.
On it.
Mr. Campbell, so generous of you to pick up. I wasn't sure if you would.
Mr. Smith's words came floating in through the speaker of the phone. Felix sighed and flicked the mute button.
Yep, I'm here. Though I thought we were supposed to meet in person. You requested it, even went so far as to request the attendees, who are here.
Ah, that's a shame I can't see it. I'll be sure to make an appointment to swing by later. Sorry.
Felix didn't respond. Silence would be his weapon in this battle. The less he offered Smith, the better.
Felix?
Came the eventual question.
Yes?
Sorry. Anyways, we were going to talk about your taxes and what that number is for you.
He's being rather vague, isn't he?
Yup.
Felix swore he could hear a chair creak and papers being shuffled. Felix smirked at the verbal pause to fill the gap. People really didn't handle silence very well in general.
That number is going to end up being rather hefty. We're not done assessing it, but I can safely tell you it's already going to be higher than 100,000.
Looking to Lily, Felix's hand was halfway to the mute button. She already had a hand up in a placating gesture, nodding her head at him.
Okay, so that falls within her own projections. Or at least close enough.
Got it, Felix said. He idly began tapping his thumb on the table, his index finger hovering over the mute button.
As we discussed previously, I'd be happy to work with you to get this handled.
I see. And when is the money due in whole?
Felix decided to cut to the chase and see if he could catch the man lying. He'd feel better about it if he could.
Not yet. Again, we're still assessing things. I'm sure you noticed your assets are frozen. I'm afraid that was our doing, as we needed to get an idea of your finances.
Rolling his eyes, Felix waited. The man wasn't very good at the government agent thing he was trying. Then again, it probably helped that Felix had a group of people who were watching out for him. Once again, he treated Smith with silence, a big, happy, heaping helping of it.
Felix?
Yes?
Never mind. So, yes, your account is frozen for a bit.
I noticed. When will you be releasing it?
I'm not sure. I could swing by tomorrow and talk to you in person about it.
In other words, come by and sleep with one of my people. Afraid I'm all booked up, Agent. With our account being frozen, everyone is certainly a lot more busy right now.
Felix didn't want to leave anything to chance, or give Smith a chance to not state something.
Any idea on when you think that'll unfreeze?
Not at this time,
Smith said in a clipped voice.
All right. I'd appreciate it if you could send over the agency directive name and past regulation that allows you to freeze my account, along with all the pertinent details about what's allowed. For documentation purposes, of course. Oh, and please also send me all the tax law information as well. Trying to get everything put together.
Smith was silent. Maybe Felix had pushed it a bit too far, but he wasn't in the mood for games. Smith was actually hurting his business and his people at this point.
Sure. I'll get that over to you today. Have a good day, Felix.
Shaking his head, Felix hit the disconnect button. Fuck him and the horse he rode in on. Felix leaned back in his chair.
Kit said he wanted you to prostitute one of us for favors,
Andrea said. That he did. Which is why, after he rides back out on his horse, the horse can fuck him. Felix pressed his hands to his face, closing his eyes. Whatever. Lily, let me know when we get in touch with Wraith.
Of course. Though there's another problem. I just got another emergency meeting request with Resnick, Blackadder, and Troy.
Great. Now what?
They wouldn't say. They're sending their people over now to see us. This was after I told them we were unable to leave the office today. They'll be here in...
The conference phone in front of them buzzed. Felix dropped his hand on the phone, hitting the connect button blindly. Yup.
Mr. Campbell, I have a group of people here representing Resnick, Blackadder, and Troy to see you.
Tell Miss Aston we'll see her shortly. We're finishing up a meeting.
Of course.
There was a pause.
Mr. Campbell, Miss Aston is no longer with the company. But they're waiting.
Huh. That's interesting. Felix opened his eyes and rested his chin in his palm. Now, why would they get rid of her? She didn't seem unintelligent.
She's actually pretty good, as far as lawyers go. Graduated near top of her class, multiple offers for employment, spotless contract record.
Lily agreed, a frown crossing her pretty face.
I didn't specify that Miss Aston was a problem in our complaint, nor did we ask to have anyone removed in it. If they got rid of her, it's for their own reasons.
Which means she refused to play ball, probably. Victoria, Felix said, looking to his bodyguard. The swordswoman came to attention, her head snapping around to him. Get me a telemedic, the petty cash briefcase, and a brick of lead. Victoria hesitated, looking to Andrea. The beastkin apparently understood something he didn't, as she suddenly split 3 times. The 3 others left the room immediately, Victoria remaining in position at the door. Felix started.
She can't leave her post. Don't worry, my others can handle it. What are you planning?
Lily asked, leaning towards him. Her moist lips were parted in a predatory grin.
You've got something in mind.
Felix shrugged, eyeing her. How would you feel about hiring Miss Aston to work in your department? I'm betting she's unemployed right now and looking. Knowing you, you've researched her top to bottom and even know her address. Your praise is never given freely, either. For you to compliment her, that means you actually think she's worthwhile in some way. Telematic taxis you to her, brings you and her back. We have a lovely meeting with her old team as she debriefs you on the way. Cash for whatever you need up front, gold bar to replenish the money you spend. Lily's eyes scrunched up in delight, and she leaned forward towards him. She reached out with her right hand to pat him on the chest.
I love it. And yes, I'd hire her in a heartbeat. I'll draw up a standard indentured contract for her.
30 minutes later, and Felix welcomed the team from Resnick, Blackadder, and Troy to have a seat at the conference table. Victoria, Lily, Andrea, and now Lauren Aston were present, the latter 3 sitting with him on his side of the table. Every person from the opposing team noticed Lauren sitting on Lily's right-hand side. Apparently, Lauren had been blackballed by the community. So, when Lily had shown up with a cash-in-hand offer, a contract, and a new home to work out of, she had only had a few questions. Her belongings would be arriving later. As an indentured, she would be offered a place to live on site with the understanding that she could move out whenever she liked. So far, no one had turned down the offer to live on site. And when we buy up this street, we'll see about expanding our subterranean kingdom. We'll just use the buildings for defenses and other things. From what Lily had told him after hiring her, Lauren had been dismissed for what they'd surmised. She'd sent a complaint to the ethics board about what her bosses had forced her to do. What she'd attempted to do to Felix, that is. It wasn't personal, it was business. And her job. She hadn't agreed with it, had sent a formal complaint, but had been nonetheless forced to go along with it if she wanted to keep her position. Since she'd gotten fired shortly after the whole thing had gone down, it sounded like someone in ethics had sold her out. All in all, she was a great acquisition, even if she couldn't offer any insight into what this meeting was about.
Good afternoon, everyone, Lily said. What can we do for you today? Please keep in mind you've once again filed for an emergency meeting outside of protocol. Our bill will be in the mail.
"This'll be quick," said a man Felix had seen several times but never bothered to learn the name of. Dropping a paper in front of Lily, they turned and left without another word. Felix was confused. All that fuss. And for what? Lily had already picked up the paper and was reading through it. If we ever wanted proof they're in league with our enemies, this would be it. They didn't bother to cash our check. When they finally did try, it was when our assets were frozen, which means the check bounced. We're now in breach. I'm sorry, Felix. I didn't even think to check to see if they'd cashed the check. Felix waved it off. Doesn't matter. We don't need the money from the landlord job anyways. I mean, don't get me wrong, this sucks. And it puts a lot more weight on the points bank, but it isn't anything we can't get through. Lily sighed and set the paper down in front of Lauren. Please get to work on this immediately. We'll reconvene tomorrow for a department meeting. I'll introduce you formally to the rest of the team. Until then, get settled, get a tour, get some food. Lauren picked up the paper, her messenger bag, and nodded. A few seconds later, and she was out the door and on her way to start her first day. She's eager. I think she'll be a great long-term employee. I didn't tell her much, as she wasn't under contract, but the little I did tell her seemed to make her happy. Felix shrugged and then sighed, slumping into his chair. I think we were supposed to talk about something next, weren't we? Yes. My first favor, Lily said, folding her hands in front of her on the desk. Apprehensive would have been a good description of her. Okay, sure. That'll at least be fun. Probably even solvable. What you got for me? Felix scratched at his head. I want you to fix my little brother. He's not well. I've got him in a full care facility right now. Technically, I'm his guardian. I've been working on getting everything together to have him transferred here. Rather surprised at the request, Felix didn't know what to say. As, of course, being your property, my property is yours. As his guardian, I've written him up an indentured contract. Lily slowly set a paper down in front of him. It was indeed a contract and had been completely filled out. My favor is, please sign the contract and then help him? Lily finally turned her head towards him, her hands gripped together in front of her. Her eyes were wet, and it looked like she was fighting to keep herself from crying. He's one of the reasons I got into magic. I wanted to find a way to help him. What exactly is wrong with him? Felix picked up the paper and looked over it. There was a momentary flicker of annoyance, a whisper of indifference to the situation. Both vanished and were replaced by the simple fact that he wanted to take care of Lily, that he didn't want her to suffer if he didn't have to. Pulling the pen from Eva out of his front pocket, he ran his thumb along the words. Guardian indeed. We're not sure. He just fell asleep one day and never woke up. His brain is active. He's not brain dead. He just won't wake up. Lily sniffed, her voice breaking. Her fingers were locked into one another, intertwined. Felix nodded his head and signed the contract. Let's go get him then. If we can get him put to rights today, we'll do it. Lily let out a sudden, sobbing breath, a smile breaking free. Then she launched forward and wrapped him up in a tight hug, her arms firm around his shoulders. Thank you. Thank you, Felix. Thank you. Awkwardly, he patted her on the back. Lily shuddered, and Felix realized she was crying. Catching Victoria's and Andrea's eyes, he motioned them towards the door, hoping they'd get the hint. Both women left without a word. Felix held on to Lily, not saying a word. The sobbing sorceress of death, the incredibly strong lawyer, the ravishing temptress, broke down. All that was left was a woman who was carrying the burdens of an older sister who only wanted her brother to be well. "It's okay, Lily. We'll get this taken care of. How old is he right now?"
16. If he wakes up,
Lily took in a shuddering breath.
he'll be so far behind. What kind of
Another shoulder-shaking sob.
life will he even be able to have?
Well, I'm sure I can cheat and use points to get him up to speed. I wouldn't worry about it too much. I mean, come on. I can practically bring people back from the dead. There's not too much.
Felix blinked at a thought that tore through his head.
I own their corpses, don't I? Why can't I just bring them back?
Lily didn't realize he'd stopped mid-sentence, but had buried her face in his neck instead, holding tightly to him as she cried. Felix followed his thoughts as he comforted Lily. Standing at the foot of the bed, Felix was surprised. The young man looked wasted away. Years of immobility, of not moving his muscles on his own, had caused them to atrophy. He looked as well cared for as one could be in a coma, though. The facility was very high-end, and Lily had paid for its treatment of her brother for another 100 years in advance. She'd been concerned what would happen to him if she was killed or captured.
Smart sister.
The boy had a faint resemblance to Lily, but Felix had a hard time seeing more than only a hint of it. The sunken cheeks, waxen and pale skin, took too much of the life out of the kid.
No time like the present,
Felix said. Calling up a screen for the teenager, Felix looked to the character sheet. Name, Lucian Lux. Alias, Luke. Power, astral projection. Secondary power, eidetic memory. Physical status, none. Mental status, lost, terrified. Positive statuses, none. Negative statuses, lost, atrophy, intellectual disability. Strength, 17. Dexterity, 23. Agility, 15. Stamina, 11. Wisdom, 31. Intelligence, 91. Luck, 47. Primary power, 91. Secondary power, 95.
Huh. He fell asleep because his power woke up. He's an astral projector. He's just lost,
Felix said. Turning his head to Lily, he gave her a smile. Only she, Victoria, and Andrea had accompanied him here. They'd arrived by telemetic and would be leaving the same way.
Really?
Lily asked hopefully, her voice threatening to break again.
Yep. Here, go stand next to him. Don't touch him immediately. He might be groggy and a little out of it. Let him wake up. I'll do a little bit of power tweaking and we'll see about him waking up.
Felix didn't mention the intellectual disability. It wouldn't help, and he could just remove it. The atrophy he'd leave alone, though, because it'd help get Lucian to have a goal.
First, the disability.
Focusing on removing that, he waited. Status correction. Mental disability. Healed. Correct status? 5,000 points. A tap of the accept button, and Felix moved on.
Next, the upgrade.
He wanted Lucian to have the ability to return to his body no matter what, at any time, regardless of how far he traveled. That it would cost him nothing to do so, and be as simple as opening his eyes. Power upgrade, astral projection, instant recall. Required primary power, 80. Met. Upgrade, 20,000 points. Felix grunted and hit the accept button again. Closing the windows, he looked up to the sleeping boy.
Wake up, Lucian. Your sister is waiting for you, and we have a lot to do today. First of which is hiring you some tutors, getting you some clothes, and getting you into a physical therapy program,
Felix said, intoning it all as a command. The indentured contracts were more or less a timed enslavement. He owned Lucian, and Lucian would have to obey.
Open your eyes and recall already.
Just like that, Lucian's eyes flipped open. Lily let out a soft crying noise, her hands clenching into her clothes. He blinked several times, his eyes slowly focused on the ceiling. It really is like watching someone wake up. Languidly, those eyes began to move, looking at each person in the room, as if cataloging them. After each person was examined, the boy's head turned towards Lily, his eyes fastening on her.
Lily?
He asked in a croaking whisper.
Hey, bud,
Lily said, tears rolling down her cheeks. Picking up a pitcher of water at the bedside table, she poured a small amount into a glass and then leaned over him.
Here, take a sip for Big Sis.
Lucien nodded his head and took a drink from the glass. Then several more.
Thanks,
he said. His voice didn't sound as raspy now.
I was lost. I couldn't find home, or you, or me. I was wandering around in a forest just now. I was following some hunters, and then it felt like someone knocked a hole through my brain, like shutters and curtains that had blocked out the light were ripped free and thrown aside. It felt like I'd been carrying weights around in my head. Then they vanished. And then I suddenly knew where my body was. I was told to open my eyes, and I'm here.
Lily let out a chuckle that sounded like a sob.
Yeah, that'd be Felix here. His power is unique. He made it so you could come back. And it seems like he fixed you too.
Whoops. Apparently the mental problem was something that existed before he went to sleep.
And I'll be talking to him about that later. For now, though, he's right. We need to get you home. I already have a room set up for you.
Home? Lucien asked, his head having slowly turned towards Felix.
Felix is home. I live with him now. He said you could live with us, so we're going home.
That sounds nice.
When we get home, then can we eat?
I'm hungry. Sure we can, Felix said with a grin. I know someone who is always itching to feed people pancakes. Andrea nodded her head happily from beside him, her hands immediately coming together in front of her.
Thank you, brother,
Lucien said, a smile on his face.
Brother?
Lily asked. She had moved over to the intercom to call the nurse to prepare discharge papers.
You're married to him, aren't you? The way you said everything, it sounds like you're married. Mom and Dad must be so happy. You were always so intimidating. Dad always said that you scared off all the boys. Mom and Dad worried you'd never get married. I'd heard them sometimes talk about it. So I'm glad you married Felix.
Lily made a squawking noise, her cheeks turning a deep red as she hurried back to Lucien's side and began whispering to him. Felix chuckled at that, turning his head to Andrea. Call the telematic back. We'll be leaving shortly. Then you can make everyone pancakes.
Pancakes!
Andrea shouted.
Pancakes!
Victoria agreed. Chapter 28. Mostly Dead. A medical attendant pulled open the door. Felix waited as the man grabbed the slab and drew it towards them. On that slab were the remains of one Jordan Taylor. He wasn't a super, or someone remarkable. He was average, really. Talented enough to make the cut for the internal security team, but that was it. He was also agnostic and had no living family. Thus, he became a perfect test subject. You're welcome to remain, but I order you not to speak of anything that occurs in this room with anyone else in any way, shape, or form. Not until I tell people myself. Do you understand? The masked medical attendant hesitated, then left the morgue quickly. Turning back to the dead man, he felt his skin prickle. Half of his face was gone, including a sizable portion of his skull. You wanted a test, Felix? This is it. First, he focused on putting Jordan's body back together, exactly as it had been before his death. A week in the morgue had probably slowed down the decay of everything. Hadn't stopped it, though. Status correction. Expand for list. Over 5,000 items. Healed. Correct status? 35,000 points. Felix accepted the change. It was costly, but if it was a successful test, then that'd be worth it. Jordan's body rapidly regenerated all the missing bits and pieces. His body reformed itself as if he'd never been touched. Though he drew no breath, and his chest remained still. Pushing his awareness into the man's character sheet, Felix looked to see if there was anything that could give him a clue on how to proceed. Name: Jordan Taylor. Physical status: decaying. Mental status: dead. Positive statuses: none. Negative statuses: dead. Strength: 53. Dexterity: 57. Agility: 48. Stamina: 67. Wisdom: 41. Intelligence: 52. Luck: 36. It's not that simple, is it? Redirecting his focus, Felix hammered at his mind on the simple idea of Jordan coming back to life. He put his mind and body back together to the point right before he died. If he could get him to breathe and get his heart beating, then he'd be alive, right? That, or we make a zombie. Status correction: dead to living. Correct status: 50,000 points. Reaching up with one hand, Felix rubbed at the back of his neck. Maybe I should ask someone to come stand with me. Just in case. Moving to the entry door, he popped it open. Looking around, he found Lily working with some of her team. She'd accompanied him down here at his request, but had remained outside, also by his request. Lily, I need a hand. She nodded absently, still talking to one of her people. A full minute later, and Lily was done, coming in to join him in the morgue.
Okay, what's with all the cloak and dagger mischief?
Asked the woman as the door closed behind her.
And why are you playing with corpses?
Felix didn't answer at first, moving over to stand next to Jordan. Raising the dead.
I see.
Lily came over to stand next to him.
And what am I doing here?
Checking to see if he has a soul. Or blow him up if he becomes a zombie. Maybe both? Not giving her a chance to answer or argue, Felix spent the points. Jordan Taylor, dead for a week, with a good part of his brain being blown out, took a deep, gasping breath. His eyes flew wide open and his body spasmed. Coughing, the man's hands shot up to his head, his eyes wide. Looking around himself, Jordan continued to cough. Easy there, Jordan. Easy. You're okay, Felix said soothingly. Stealing a look to Lily, he asked under his breath, He is okay, isn't he? Lily was shocked, her eyes wide, skin pale, her mouth hanging open. After a second, she lifted a hand towards the man and then nodded her head.
He's fine. His soul is his, and it's there,
Lily said in a whisper. Jordan had sat up by this point, his hands covering his naked body as his head jerked back and forth between Lily and Felix. What happened? We were fighting in the lobby. The man in front of me had a shotgun, Jordan said in a quivering voice. You died. That man shot you in the head with that shotgun. I died? Yeah. You died. You've been in the morgue for a while. About a week. Felix fell quiet. Jordan seemed to be taking it pretty well. No need to overburden the man if he didn't have to. I don't understand. I died, but I'm not dead? Yeah, you're not dead. I brought you back. Back? Yeah, from the dead. Oh, I'm a zombie then. Or something? No, not at all. Lily is here, and she already confirmed for me that you are exactly as you were before you died. It's as if you never died at all. But why? Jordan seemed calm still, so Felix saw no reason to end the experiment. Why bring you back? Why not? It said in your file you were agnostic, so there was no religious reason not to put yourself back together. No family either. Yeah. No, neither. So, I just go back to work? Take a few days off. We didn't report your death, so no worries on that end. You can just pick up where you left off. Yeah, a few days off. Okay, I can do that. Nothing's different? No, nothing's different. You might have to get a new room assigned and get some new clothes and things, but nothing HR can't fix up, I'm sure. I'll have another come in and get you squared away, all right? Felix asked Jordan, patting him on the back. Yeah, okay. Did we win? Decisively so. Look forward to seeing you around, Jordan. Felix turned on his heel and left the morgue, stopping only to give Andrea instructions.
Felix, how many points did that cost?
Lily asked, her gait slowing down as she caught up with him. Victoria and Andrea trailed behind. 50 to bring him back to life. 35 to get his body put back together.
You do know what this means, right?
That I should probably go buy the corpses of some of the strongest supers in the past and bring them back? Felix responded, hitting the elevator button.
You could do that, yes. But I think first and foremost you should have HR get everyone to sign a life-after-death policy. Not everyone may want to come back,
Lily said. She entered the elevator when the doors slid open. Andrea and Victoria entered as well, though they were still silent. Maybe this was a bad idea. Yeah, I kind of figured. It's why I picked Jordan. Agnostic, no family. Felix hit the button for the floor to his office. Next thing on the to-do list, buying the street.
We've had some success with that. It'll take some time to buy everything, but considering our assets are still frozen, that's fine. We need to meet with an inspector tomorrow to go over all the buildings and make sure they're up to code for a purchase. I already sent you the invite, and you accepted, but I don't think you actually read the invite. Not that we care about the inspection anyways, since we can just send in our teams and fix anything, but those are the regulations.
Lily leaned up against the back wall of the elevator as the doors slid shut. Great. Why is my entire life meetings? And meetings to prepare for meetings? Maybe this is why owners hire a CEO and then wander off. Felix shook his head, his mouth twisting up in a grimace.
No CEO would ever care as much as the owner does. That's just the reality of the situation. You're doing fine,
Lily said in response. Felix huffed as the doors opened in front of him. Setting out for his office, he couldn't find fault in her words. No one would care as much as he did. Yeah. I'll get with Kit and have HR run up a new policy and get everyone to indicate their preference. I'll also have them discuss the fact that Jordan is indeed alive and no longer dead. I imagine I'll get a number of people trying to get me to raise dead family members. Felix thought on that for a moment as he opened the door to his office. I suppose that's doable, but we'd have to have them as a different contract. I don't think a single year under the indentured contract would cover the points.
Good news then. We've been experimenting with HR on the contracts. We can build a contract that lasts 5 years now. It took some doing with verbiage and how much magical power to put into the seal, but it works. Binding that contract with a return from the dead is more than enough oomph to seal the deal sufficiently.
Huh. So the nature of the deal helps enforce the contract? Felix spun his chair around and sat down heavily in it, calling up his personal terminal. Victoria took up her position at the door, and Andrea lay down on the couch. Neither spoke. Their silence was becoming eerie. He imagined they'd have to consider the choice and its implications. He was blessedly unable to resurrect himself, so his choice would never come.
Magic can be finicky when it comes to people signing things with their souls. This would work. The hard part is getting a family member who owns the dead. I mean, who really owns a corpse? I imagine it might come down to if they left a will, and if they left an estate to someone. That'd probably qualify.
Felix nodded his head, the conversation falling off as he started to get lost in the day-to-day minutiae of running a company. Andrea was on high alert. Her others swarmed the streets, roaming up and down them. They covered the corners, stared people down when they got close to Felix, and generally made asses of themselves, to the point that people would cross the street to avoid the mess. He'd even caught sight of a few others clearing and utilizing the rooftops. Victoria was at his side, of course. He'd finally heard from Ioana that she was happy Victoria was at his side. Apparently, she was a master swordswoman and could even fight Ioana to a standstill. Felicia and the inspector had disappeared inside a building 10 minutes ago and were going through the entire thing with a team, as well as the owners. Andrea turned her head to one side as someone probably relayed something to her. After a second, she turned her eyes back to the building they were standing in front of.
It looks like vomit. It's vomit yellow. I want to paint it. Can we paint it?
She asked. I don't care. Pretty sure Felicia and her team are only interested in the guts of the building. You'll have to link up with design, Felix said offhandedly. Andrea hadn't said anything about why she'd gone silent yesterday after he had pulled Jordan back from the grave. By and large, Legion as a whole was rather impressed with the news that death was not the end for them. At least, if they opted for that in their HR policy. Much as he'd predicted, the yes and no responses were divided by religion. Makes sense. Maybe she's religious? I mean, why not ask? Andrea, Felix started, his voice unsure. Why were you so upset yesterday after you found out I could raise the dead?
Huh?
She asked, her eyes not meeting his own.
I don't understand. By the way, after this I want to—
Andrea, if you don't want to talk about it, just tell me that. I'll leave it alone. And I ask because I care. The beastkin winced, her tail drooping.
It was just surprising. Really. I think I've got you figured out, and you do something I never even thought about. I mean, I'm not smart, right? I'm scared that maybe you're sleeping with me for a reason I'm too stupid to figure out.
Oddly reasonable. Though a bit late to worry about that sort of thing, isn't it? Well, I can tell you I'm sleeping with you because you're beautiful and I care about you. I'm not sure where we'll end up, but I can tell you that it's not just sex. Is that fair? Felix tried to get it all out as straightforwardly as possible. Andrea was a simple and straightforward girl, after all. The beastkin's mismatched eyes were glowing faintly, staring into him. Her tail was lifted and swishing back and forth slowly, her entire body angled toward him. All around him, the others had shifted as well. Many were watching him, their eyes glowing and intent.
Really?
Yep. Look alive, your others are watching, Felix said with a grin and a vague gesture around them. As one, Andrea and the others returned to their normal pose. It was strange and unnerving.
Lily was right,
Andrea whispered, the ears on her head swiveling around. Before Felix could question her, Victoria pulled her sword from its sheath. Her eyes were fixed on a man heading their way. The rather large individual, who had shouldered his way through several others to get past them, stopped dead. Victoria had taken several steps out in front of Felix and was in the process of leveling her blade out in front of her, pointing the tip towards the man. Looking at it closely, Felix realized it wasn't the same sword she'd had previously. It shone in the light, a cold, deadly shimmer. Upgrade from Felicia? That large man looked at Victoria for another second before he doubled back the way he came and took the crosswalk to the other side of the street. Victoria gave her blade a flourish and sheathed it. Sniffing disdainfully, she wandered back to Felix's side. Felicia and the inspector chose that moment to pop out.
Nothing terrible with that one. Elevator needs an update to the electrical, but that's it,
Felicia said grumpily. She marched up to Felix and glared up at him. She was viewing the entire exercise as a waste of time. He couldn't disagree with her, but it still needed to be done. Okay, get it written down. Where to next? Felix did his best not to sigh.
Nowhere. Mr. Inspector Man needs a break. He and his team are going to break for 30. Union and all. I say we hit the cafe,
she said, pointing across the way. The cafe in question had already agreed to the purchase. The staff, after being informed of the purchase, seemed happy that nothing was changing. Doubly so when the volume of customers skyrocketed after it was made known Legion was buying into the place and would be subsidizing the costs for employees starting immediately.
Come on, moneybags. You can expense it.
Felicia walked out into the street and started crossing without a thought towards the cars. In a creepy scene out of a thriller movie, others flooded the street and began blocking traffic in both directions. Felix couldn't help it now and sighed, stepping out into the street and following along.
What you doing about Agent Shithead?
Felicia nearly yelled over her shoulder at him. Who, Smith?
I have an appointment with his boss after this. Going to see if we can get our assets unfrozen. Lily prepped me with a lovely document showing how we can file a lawsuit and claim damages if they don't.
Ah, the princess. You parking her yet? You're already parking the wolf.
Andrea left his side and skipped ahead to be next to Felicia.
He sure is. Me, that is, not Lily. Not yet. We're trying to get him to settle for both of us, and only us. Lily says she can share with me because I have as much guile as a knife. I don't mind sharing with her because she's honest with me.
Oh? Good on you two, then. May your parking be rough and messy.
Felicia slapped Andrea on the ass, getting a squeal out of the beastkin. Then Felicia stepped past her and into the cafe, shoving the door aside. Victoria gave him a strange look as she passed by him entering the cafe. Felix could only wonder at what the hell Lily and Andrea were up to. A soft chirping came from his phone. Felix waited till he sat down next to Andrea before he checked to see what the notification was. It was an email from Lily. Opening it, he felt his temperature rise and his teeth clicked together. His meeting with Smith's boss had been canceled without a reason. Their assets were still frozen, and now he had no recourse. He wouldn't bow to Smith and whore out one of his people. He knew he didn't have a moral compass that pointed north, but even he wouldn't sink that low. No, he had other alternatives that he could employ that would be worse, but not as bad for his own people. He tapped in a response for Lily. He wanted her to get a hold of Wraith for a meeting. No sooner was his message away than did another message come in for him, this time from Kit. Felix turned off the display and picked up the menu. All three women had turned their heads to him at his noise of displeasure. Before they could ask, he opened his mouth again. None of the shops are buying gold anymore. Someone figured out what we were doing, I'm betting. Which means we need to figure out where to make our money next.
Cars,
Felicia said, slapping her menu closed.
They can't stop us from selling cars to the public. Get all our cash together and buy as many junkers as we can. My team will repair everything we can and list out the parts we're missing. Then your stupid ass comes through and magics up whatever we're missing with your points. The end.
Felicia held up her hand towards the waitress and gestured at her angrily. The dwarf didn't wait for anyone or anything. Cars, huh? That's not a bad idea. We can hit the scrap yards and buy as many junkers as we can and push them all through private auctions or the used car lots. Chapter 29. Moral Compass. The sun hadn't even risen yet. The pre-dawn gloom was a grungy haze outside. Felix stared into his terminal as he contemplated the call he was about to take with Wraith. Smith hadn't really left him any room at this point. They really did need access to their accounts. Sure, they could function without for a long time, but at a cost.
Thinking about it?
Lily asked from the couch. Everyone else had been cleared from the room, and Andrea was still in bed. Yeah. Everyone up to this point had always felt vindicated in some way. This one, less so, Felix said, rubbing at his jaw with one hand.
Then why do it? You have alternatives.
Because those alternatives don't do me any favors for my own people, and I refuse to put my people over a table. Literally, in this case, if I don't have to. Smith can take his horny self to a bar. Felix shook his head as he said it. He knew his reasons for doing it, but it didn't make it any easier.
For what it's worth, I appreciate it. You're not exactly a shining beacon of moral righteousness. Then again, you're not the same person I first met anymore,
Lily said. Felix scoffed at that, his mind going to Eva and her blasted pin. Yeah, tell me about it. From resources to employees. Definitely a change in my own plans as well.
That and you keep putting those precious money-making points of yours back into your people.
They need it.
The person who can split into multiple people and is practically immortal needed regeneration?
Lily asked, her tone becoming mildly antagonistic. Well, no.
Or Felicia needed that makeover you gave her?
That was part of a deal.
Or even Kit, our beloved psychic, who is now a telepath, telekinetic, and a master of illusions. She clearly needed all of that.
We were escaping from Tanker. We needed—
No, you didn't. I've talked to Kit and Andrea. They were both under the impression they could swerve around him. He's strong, not fast.
Felix thought on that. On all three, really. In each case, he had had a clear reason for doing it, or so he'd believed at the time. They still felt justified. Sort of. What do you want me to say, Lily? Felix pressed his forehead to the desk. His call with Wraith was due any second now.
Nothing. Only that you should realize that you aren't doing things entirely for a necessary purpose. Now, Wraith is going to call you in 10 seconds. Get your game face on.
10 seconds? How would you know that? Felix asked, curious. As he lifted his eyes from the desk, they went to the phone, then to Lily. She was dressed in dark colors that hugged her frame but were modest and professional, much as she always was. Instead of responding, she pointed to the phone. As if by magic, the phone rang. Controlling his response and trying to do the same for his heart, Felix accepted the call.
Wraith,
came the sibilant voice on the other end. Thank you for calling. Felix took a breath and went with his chosen course of action. Can you kill Smith and make it look accidental?
Yes.
Can you do it after forcing him to unfreeze us?
No.
Kill him. Return for debrief after you complete your duty.
Done.
The line disconnected and went dead. Felix pursed his lips and set the phone down. That was easier than it should have been?
Not really. You knew what you wanted to do a while ago. This was only the culmination of that. For what it's worth, I'm glad you made the decision. Smith was a problem.
That he was. I'm not looking forward to telling Kit about this. Felix turned back to the window, watching the first fingers of light reaching out above the buildings.
She won't be happy. She's still a hero at heart. She'll need some placating and maybe something to soothe her conscience. I'll ask her privately later if she wants me to take over counterintelligence, the dirty side of the business.
Thanks. Not sure if she'll take you up on it, but I appreciate you offering it to her all the same.
Anything for you,
Lily murmured from directly behind him. She'd snuck up on him. Felix didn't have it in him to react right now to her provocations. In fact, this was probably a good time to go on the attack. Andrea mentioned you were trying to get me, yourself, and herself into a three-way relationship.
I'm not surprised. It was only a matter of time before she mentioned it. She's a good girl, but has about as much guile
as a knife, they said at the same time. Yeah, she really doesn't have a cunning bone in her body. But what about you, Lily? You're a beautiful woman who could have any man she wanted. I can't imagine you willingly signing up to be a plaything. He could feel Lily standing behind him. Felix didn't even need to look at her to know she was there. It was something he'd noticed about her a while ago. She put out an energy, what he assumed was magical energy, and anyone nearby could feel the pressure of it. Or so he assumed. He'd never actually asked anyone about it.
You're right. I'd never sign up to be a plaything, and you'd never treat me like one. You're the type of idiot that, once he starts sleeping with a woman, happily shuts down that entire area of his life, to literally have eyes for no one else.
Felix blustered for a moment at that, then deflated. She wasn't wrong. His experience with women was almost entirely dependent on them taking the lead. He was a follower when it came to that. Monogamy felt right, and he didn't look elsewhere. It was also why the idea bothered him about having two women.
Much as you told Andrea, we'll see where this goes. No promises, but it's a start. Besides, I can't deny I'm interested in you. You're fascinating in a strange way. I'm not brave enough to jump into your bed as easily as Andy did, but we'll see where it all goes. Like I said.
Snorting, Felix shook his head. Only you would ask a man to date her while saying that.
I know, and that's why you're taking me to dinner tonight.
Lily's lips pressed to his cheek.
Doesn't have to be fancy, but I do expect it to be just us. Well, other than Vicky. See you at the department meeting later. I've got to run. Need to pick out a nice dress.
Andrea's fist landed cleanly on his jaw and sent him crashing to the ground. Felix felt like his head was spinning. That, and he heard this high-pitched whining noise. It was really freaking distracting.
Get up! I'm coming for you!
Andrea called out to him as she closed in on him and struck him twice more. Once to the shoulder, the second to his midsection. Stumbling to his feet, Felix managed to get his hands up in time to fend off a punch.
Good. Faster next time, dear. Faster. Your opponent won't wait for you to get up to your feet.
Andrea got in closer and sent a fist towards his stomach. He sidestepped correctly, but wasn't fast enough. She caught the side of his stomach and sent him to the mat again.
"Pah! He's done,"
Ioana said. The sound of her heavy footfalls departing were like the sound of accusations to him. Too slow, too weak, too much thought. That was what they kept saying. He'd asked for this, and he was getting better, but he was starting to regret this course of action. Panting, Felix managed to at least keep himself up on one knee, rather than flopping into the mat.
Better. Quicker, though. If you can't be quicker, block it. Expecting to dodge attacks is honestly a good way to get hit. Silly dear. Don't worry, I'll make it all better tonight.
Andrea was leaning over the top of him, her hands patting his shoulders.
Yeah, thanks. Did, Lily tell you about tonight?
She did! I look forward to hearing how it goes from her later.
Andrea's tail was swishing back and forth happily as she said it. She was genuinely happy for Lily.
By the way, I know I say this every time, but I appreciate the training. I know it isn't easy to teach someone with little to no aptitude.
Felix groaned and got to his feet.
Aptitude is merely a way to measure how quickly one learns something. In this case, you just need more time.
Andrea gave him a bright smile and then wandered off. Victoria replaced her, holding out a wooden sword to him. Felix sighed and took the sword from her hand.
Training while tired.
I know. Training while tired is more difficult, but doesn't hinder learning.
Felix grumped, and then fell back into the neutral pose she'd beaten into him days previous. Her training blade came up into the same pose, then darted forward. She'd done that to him almost every time, forcing him to expect an attack immediately every time they started. Managing to get his blade up in the appropriate deflection, he stepped in and struggled to bring his weapon across as quickly as he could. Victoria was gone before he even finished the block, having stepped backward out of his range.
Good. Now let's start,
Victoria said with a sickening amount of enthusiasm. Victoria did much the same as Andrea had, beating him forwards and backwards across the mat, giving him a number of bruises and welts with each pass. Eventually, Victoria released him from his hell and sent him off to the medical room. Bruises and welts were fine, but there was no sense in having them beyond the original lesson if you didn't have to. Felicia's machines did a great job of getting a person back to normal for most anything, especially since he couldn't do a damn thing to himself. It always ended up coming back to that. The inability to modify his own parameters, to upgrade himself so easily as he did others. After the medical fix-up and a quick snack, Felix was the first person to the department head meeting. He normally was. It gave him some time to refine his agenda and to get everything laid out how he wanted it. Before he even had a chance to start, Kit came in.
Good. I was hoping to catch you alone,
she said, dropping down into a chair directly in front of him. Felix could only nod his head, not even bothering to open his terminal. Instead, he folded his hands in front of him and looked to the telepath.
What can I do for you?
Lily told me about Wraith and Smith. I'm not really sure this was the right path.
All right. What options were you considering instead? Kit blinked and then looked to the table.
Other options? I mean, we could have just waited, couldn't we?
Could we have?
Well, yes. Yes, we could have.
Okay. What are our finances?
Our finances?
If you're confident in our ability to wait, then clearly our finances are good. What are our finances?
No, they're not good. Unless something changed, we'd barely have enough capital to pay our bills on time. Not including Dimitri's loan is coming due.
Okay. If our finances aren't good, and we'd be in trouble soon, what other options did we have available?
I don't know. But we didn't have to kill Smith.
No, we didn't. Yet, as I've been directing your own mind to the problem, I could not find myself another answer.
Killing someone isn't an answer.
It is when they're not a good person, and are demanding that I prostitute you out to service them. That was another option, you remember. It seems unlikely, but would you have preferred that to killing him? He'd be back next month for the same thing, mind you. Kit chewed at her lip, her eyes scrunching up.
No,
she said finally. The choice isn't on you, Kit. You had nothing to do with it. This is all on me, and it's my burden to bear, not yours. Now, is there anything else you wanted to talk about before the others came? Kit shook her head, her eyes still glued to the table. After a handful of heartbeats, her gaze moved up and met his own.
I'm not very good at this. In the beginning, I was bitter, jaded. It felt right. Now, though, now I feel as if I'm abusing my powers.
The powers I gave you, Felix clarified. Kit nodded her head once.
The powers you gave me.
Have I asked you to take a life that you felt wasn't justified?
No.
Have I asked you to harm anyone who wasn't attempting to hurt us?
No.
Have I asked you to do anything against your will?
Yes. Well, no. You listened when I told you I didn't want to use the sausage machine on our people.
Then what's the problem, Kit? I don't understand. Help me understand. Kit licked her lips and then made a vague gesture at him, then back at herself. She shook her head a fraction and then took a partial breath and held it. Then just as suddenly let it out.
I don't know.
Is it because you can't read my mind? Never had the problem of not being able to verify a thought, concern, or problem without a proof positive? Felix said it as gently as he could. It was the only thing he could think of. Kit and he hadn't ever really disagreed on many things, but small little things could have added up in her head. And without her ability to rifle through his thoughts, he imagined she had no way to verify her own judgments about situations.
Could that be it? It just sounds so selfish. So childlike.
How do you confirm what someone believes?
I do exactly what you said. I look into the mind of others to see how it was received or thought of and adjust.
Have you considered not doing that? Taking people at their face value?
Why would I?
For fun? See if you can hone in on what psychiatrists and psychologists have been doing for years? Up to you, though. Merely a question. As to the problem at hand, I wouldn't worry much about it. Nothing has changed since our last talk. You're our conscience and moral compass. I expect you to continue pointing due north and provide me with a counterbalance. The door to the conference room burst open, and Felicia entered, followed closely by Ioana. Before the door could close, Lily, Andrea, Victoria, and Miyu trooped in, taking their seats. Victoria took up a spot behind Felix's right shoulder. Welcome, one and all. This department head meeting is more than likely a critical one, as I have one update that must be shared. I'm sure you have topics you want to cover as well, so I'll be quick about it. If no one has any objections, Felix looked around the room to each member to confirm there were none. I've tasked Wraith to kill Agent Smith. He should be dead by tomorrow. At that point, I'll be heading over to their office to demand to speak with our caseworker. With any luck, we'll get a new one that will take one look at the length of time our assets have been frozen and undo it. Everyone had different reactions. Ioana, Miyu, and Felicia nodded their heads. Lily had no reaction, as she had already known. Andrea looked thoughtful, and Kit still seemed frustrated. Beyond that, everything is as you heard it last. Assets frozen, gold is no longer being purchased in the city, the two stores on each side of ours steal perhaps 90% of our customers, and the estate lawyers deliberately held on to a check so it'd bounce. We're under attack. It's just no longer a physical attack. Grim faces were turned to him around the conference table. Everyone knew what the score was, and no one could doubt what was happening. We'll start with Felicia, as she had a brilliant idea on how to generate some cash flow. Felicia? All heads swung towards the diminutive woman.
Exactly as planned. We're overhauling all the cars we could get our hands on from the junkyards. By the end of next week, we'll have them all ready for sale, providing you can carve out some time to get your ass in gear and magic us up some parts.
I can make that happen. Any initial estimations? Felicia wrinkled her nose and then shrugged.
Not really.
Price of all the cars we bought in mint condition, with working parts, would probably be several million. Our investment wasn't large, so that'd be good. Won't know till we run an auction. We're already distributing flyers about a car show and auction. Great. Anything else? No. Weapon work is going good. Tiny robots, too. Power sources coming along. Your personal warden was started earlier. That'll be up and running soon. Getting my people experienced with the cars first, similar in some ways. Great. Next, Lily? Legally, we're rock solid. Everything we're doing is actually above board, so it makes our job relatively easy. Nothing really going on there, though everyone and their mother is trying to get the paperwork together for dead relatives. Felix could only nod. That had been a concern, and he wasn't that worried about it. It had only helped bring up his numbers and his people. This financial crisis was a temporary problem. Finance would be next, I suppose, and that's where the problem lies. Lily sighed and pressed her fingertips to her brow, just above her glasses. We've got enough capital to go maybe 2 weeks. 3 on the outside. It's not going to go very well if they don't unlock our accounts. I see. Is there anything we can do to help shore up those numbers? No, there isn't. We'll be declaring bankruptcy soon if that car auction doesn't work out. That's the reality, and there's no changing it. He hadn't thought it possible to feel worse than he had minutes ago. He was wrong. I'm going to make pancakes. Pancakes make everything better. Andrea stood up and held up an arm. Several others leapt out of her and held up an arm each. Pancakes! They shouted in unison. Unable to help himself, Felix lifted his arm with a smile. Pancakes! Chapter 30. The Bait. This was a risk. A risk to come to a location he'd ordered someone killed at. A risk to step outside in public where he was attacked every time he'd done so. A risk to go to something he'd called and made arrangements for the previous day, giving his enemies time to prepare. A risk to go make demands of a department that didn't care a whisker about him or his people. Yet here he was, sitting in the lobby of the government agency that seemed hell-bent on screwing him over. Victoria was with him, of course, along with Andrea and a number of others, but that was it. Everyone else was busy trying to scrounge up material, capital, or favors to get them through this hardship. They'd only allowed him 2 companions to accompany him anyways, so any more would have to wait in the lobby. Felix was dressed up in one of his nicer suits. Andrea looked as if Lily had dressed her, as she was striking and modest at the same time. A blood-red blouse, a black jacket, and black pencil skirt. Victoria had chosen something more mundane, a suit jacket, slacks, button-up shirt, and ballistic vest. That and her very real, very high-end sword hanging from her hip. No one had attempted to take it from her, though Andrea's handgun had been confiscated. After getting a pat-down and being asked what their business was and who they were here to see, they were promptly told to wait. They sat them down in the lobby right there without another word or direction. That was an hour ago.
Can we go home? You smell great, and every time your eyes fall on me, I can smell your need,
Andrea said, laying her head on his shoulder. Victoria snorted at that, shifting from one foot to the other. She hadn't relaxed her guard, and seemed as tightly wound as she'd ever been. No, we need to stay and make sure this gets taken care of. You heard what was said at the meeting. No more questions about that. I'd rather not discuss our business out in the open. Who knows what's being recorded?
Fine. I'll be good. Lily told me that when I'm good, you're supposed to reward me. Oh, that reminds me. How'd the date go? Lily seemed really happy this morning.
Felix felt his lips curl into a smile. We decided to postpone it till this evening because I couldn't get a reservation.
Huh? Then why was she happy?
Andrea asked, her tail sliding up behind him to curl around his hip.
Because he's taking it seriously,
Victoria answered.
He didn't want to just take her out. He wanted to take her to a nice restaurant. Oh. You can make pancakes with me, and then we'll mate in our bed. That'd make me happy,
Andrea said, pressing up closer to his side. I'm all for that, but I think maybe right now isn't the best place to talk about it. Or cling so closely to me. It's pleasant, but distracting.
What if we started making out? Do you think they'd want to get rid of us if we started making a scene?
Felix felt the sweat pop out on his brow, his skin heating up several degrees.
I don't think that'd be wise,
Victoria said critically.
How could you protect him at the same time? They disallowed your others in here, remember? I need you helping me here. That's no fun. Besides, when I said it, Felix got really excited. I could practically hear his heart rate speed up, and the scent was strong. Really? That strong?
Victoria asked.
Maybe he wants you to watch. Oh, or maybe he wants you to join? Not sure. We should ask Lily. She'll know what to think of this. I think that...
At that moment, a man in a suit opened the interior lobby door and held it open.
Mr. Campbell?
Standing up happily, Felix left the two women behind with the speed of his escape. Andrea and Victoria scrambled to catch up with him as he dodged past the crony and into the hallway beyond.
This way, please.
Felix didn't bother to respond as he followed the man down the hallway. They wouldn't have anything to say to him that would be worthwhile anyways. And if they did, they certainly wouldn't tell him prior to his meeting with what he assumed would be their boss. Or at least someone higher up in the corporate ladder. People who fetch guests in the lobby don't typically have a lot to add at this point. They were led to a glass door, which the man opened for them.
Mr. Chirk will be with you shortly. Have a seat.
Felix dropped into a chair and rested his left ankle on his right knee. More waiting. Goody. It's a shame we can't bill them for our time. This'd be a hell of a lucrative trip. Andrea shrugged her shoulders, wandering over to a window. Her head turned one way, then the other, peering out of the glass. Then she held a hand up to her ear.
This is Pancake. Request street actual check-in. Pancake actual is in south side of building, floor 2, window. Confirm overwatch,
she said. Felix watched her back as she easily slipped into her role of Myriad. He could vaguely hear responses from the others, but nothing concrete. Victoria was busy searching the room, looking for anything out of place that could be a problem, even going so far as to open the desk drawers looking for weapons.
Pancake receives. Maintain overwatch on this position.
Andrea turned around and looked to Victoria while folding her hands behind her back.
All is well and accounted for. Can you confirm the room is clear?
Victoria popped open an electrical device she pulled out of her tactical vest. Thumbing the side of it, she looked down to what he assumed was a display.
Listening devices. Nothing outside expectations. Room is clear,
Victoria said, closing the device up. She walked to the door and took up a position there.
Good work.
Andrea turned to Felix and gave him a grin.
Room clear. Street is covered.
Felix gave her a small smile and felt weird about the entire thing. He knew their precautions were necessary considering the number of attempts on his life, but they still made him feel strange. He still felt like Felix, the fast food manager. Felix, the lonely man who barely made enough at his dead-end job. Now I'm Felix, the one with 24 hours a day, 7 days a week bodyguards who sweep and clear buildings that I'll be entering. Thanks, Andrea. Hopefully we can get this taken care of and get moving. I'm looking forward to not fearing payroll every day. Costs keep rising, even if we can't get a hold of our accounts. This whole thing is fucking ridiculous. Felix shifted, slouching into his chair.
Agreed, but we do what we must.
Felix opened his mouth to retort when the door opened behind them. An older man in a dark suit walked in. His eyes snapped to Victoria, whose hand was resting on the sword at her side, then to Andrea, whose hand had dipped into her jacket. Felix wouldn't have been surprised if Andrea had managed to slip a holdout pistol through security.
I see. Mr. Campbell?
Asked the older man, looking to Felix. That'd be me. I'll cut to the chase, Felix said, getting to his feet. My accounts have been frozen for longer than the statute. At that moment, his phone went off. Pausing long enough to rotate his wrist, he glanced at the linked screen. Eva Adelpha. I'm sorry, this might be important, Felix apologized. Tapping the screen, he fished his phone out of his suit pocket and held it up to his ear. Eva, what?
The school is under attack!
As abruptly as she'd started talking, the phone went dead. Feeling his heartbeat speed up, he dropped the phone to his waist. He quickly thumbed through the security screen and pulled up his contacts. Tapping Iowana's line, he held the phone back up to his ear.
Mr. Campbell, if you can't—
Hush!
Victoria commanded at the man, stepping between Mr. Turk and Felix.
I wanna,
came the strong voice of his war maiden. Eva called me, said there was an attack on the school.
What? Give me a second.
Now, see here. Mr. Campbell, if you can't give me your attention this moment, you can leave.
Felix's eyes tracked back to Mr. Turk. They'd kept him waiting for a long time. Long enough that Felix had gotten angry. Long enough that the anger had turned into a cold, quiet rage. Long enough that he'd been tempted to send Wraith in and clear out the entire agency.
I mean it. You can leave and we can schedule an appointment at another time. I believe my calendar is open in 2 weeks. Until then, nothing will change with you or your accounts.
Felix blinked. That was quite a threat. It had put them well outside the point that they'd more than likely become insolvent.
We've got confirmation,
Iowana said in his ear.
There's an attack going on, all right. I'm sending multiple squads and all 4 wardens. I'd appreciate it if you could suit up and join us. Having you there should cut through red tape since you own the school.
Well?
Mr. Turk asked. Felix blinked, his thoughts grinding to an immediate halt. Because there was no need to debate the choice. Guardian, indeed. Apparently my weapon of choice is a pin. You'll be hearing from my lawyers, Mr. Turk. Mr. Smith tried to blackmail me and my people, then held our accounts hostage. I do have proof of it. I plan on taking this up with Skipper. I hope you're ready to get your entire organization cracked open. Dismissing the man with a flick of his free hand, he turned his head to the side to focus on the call. Victoria, taking his intention as something else, shoved the older man out of his own office and shut the door. I'll be there. Send me a telemedic to pick us up. We'll have the others bring the cars back. Only minutes after having received the call, everyone was on site. The telemedics had earned their keep several times over today. Felix would need to increase their capacity and give them some combat training. That and increase the number of them. All over the school, his people were swarming the grounds. Squads were actively working to clear the entire school. Each squad was made up of 12 people. Each one of those squads were hand-assembled to form their teams. They were filled with both mundanes carrying amped-up gear and supers to provide force multipliers. On top of that very deadly force, the 4 wardens were released. They were being utilized separately of each other. The long-range models were used to clear open areas that could be a killing field. The shield versions were being sent into the close-quarters area to clear any combatants that could be hiding and waiting in ambush. After their arrival, it was obvious the school was in lockdown. Students and teachers were huddling in their classrooms. The classrooms that would have had students from Legion, however, were conspicuously empty. Iowana and her team moved as only trained professionals could. Having been given a huge budget and open recruiting was clearly paying off. Training rooms, equipment, extensive mental conditioning through HR, the best in medical care. Iowana's people had been showered in everything that could and would make them lethal, deadly, and balanced mentally. Those soldiers, as if they could be called anything else, were clad in dark black tactical gear from head to toe, armed with high-end weaponry, both prototypes from Felicia and White's lab, and standard armory issue. Equipped with spell-powered gear built by Lily and her corps of magicians. They were a force that could probably stand toe-to-toe with actual special forces and win. Even if they fell, providing they'd signed the appropriate form, they would rise again for the next battle. Wiser, having gained experience most paid for with their life and were unable to act on. At least that mountain of money was worth it. Felix tried to marshal his thoughts and mind back to the situation. He was standing there in his powered armor like a daydreaming fool. Around him, his people worked. And they really were his people. Someone had been building him a team to function around him in the field. A command team. Those people had assembled as soon as word had spread that he'd be taking the field. Bodyguards, techs, telematics, and supers who would be useful for communications. They'd put together an instant communications hub and headquarters for him in 2 minutes of arrival. He'd have to check in to see who had set this up for him. It was incredibly effective, and he felt like he was tied into the whole operation even without being there. Kit, who wasn't far away, was acting as if it was completely normal and expected, making her the prime suspect. He was watching as a warden began its approach on the library building. It was a massive stone-faced thing that looked as if it had been a truly large endowment from a wealthy contributor, probably to buy the silence of the school as well as entry for the child of a well-known super. Or a delinquent. As the warden made its way across the field towards the building, the tension mounted. This would be a defensible area for both students to find shelter and for a hostile force to make home. When the warden reached the halfway point, a missile flared to life from an upper window. In a second, that missile closed the distance and exploded into the warden. A ball of flame went up around the figure, the camera feed giving way to static and red glare. 2 seconds later, and the warden was visible again. Around it, a blue glowing shell flickered. The warden angled itself backwards and engaged the jump jets on its legs and fired, sending it rocketing back the way it had come. As it flew, the warden spun around, bringing its railgun up to its shoulder. It lined up a shot and fired. Having fired, it finished its spin, putting its back to the building. The massive round lit the air on fire as it boomed out. The slug went through the window the heavy explosive had come from. Switching from the warden's camera to an aerial drone, Felix flipped over to its heat camera. All around the interior of the window and ground was the bright red of heat. Splattered liberally in every direction, the warden had landed their shot and blown apart the combatant.
"Enemy down!"
reported a tech over the comms. The warden who had been engaged on came to a graceful landing behind a building.
"Damn good shot,"
Felix muttered.
"Thank you, sir,"
came back the immediate response. He hadn't meant to congratulate the soldier, but whatever. It really was a great shot. The other long-range warden was moving to the other side of the building now to set up a crossfire. The 2 shield wardens continued to clear and search. Half of the deployed squads broke off and began to cordon off the library. Curiously, one squad broke away and was making their way back towards the landing area. Routing his helmet's feed to a drone in that area, he found the reason. Crates had been dropped in by telemedics after the area was secured. Telemedics could carry quite a bit with them, but the original power had been built around the measurements of humans. The crates themselves looked as if they'd been designed to maximize what a telemedic could bring with them. There was a squad watching over Ground Zero and those crates, but there was no indication of what was in those crates. Turning his focus back to the library, the wardens were watching for heat signals in the windows. They weren't cleared to fire yet, as they couldn't ID those targets, but that wouldn't be the case for much longer. Part of each squad was assigned an electronics warfare and reconnaissance member. A number of small drones were being launched, both into the air and on the ground. Making sure his voice wouldn't carry, and that his comms were on silent, Felix cleared his throat. "I'm glad to see that constant training preparation is paying off. Remind me to approve whatever Iowana wants after this." He meant it, too. This was smooth. He couldn't deny they were reacting to the enemy movements, but this was a planned reaction. Planned reactive movements.
You already did approve everything she asked for. I'm still surprised you approved the armored cars,
Victoria said, watching one of the monitors. Felix cast his mind back. Now that he was thinking about it, he couldn't remember not approving anything Iowana asked for. Everything had been drawn up with plans, expectations, and costs that had seemed acceptable at the time. "Armored cars," Felix said slowly. One of the techs directed a camera to the roadway entry. There sat 6 armored cars, blocking traffic on both sides of the street. Their turrets were pointed down those open streets. They were painted a dark black, with white lettering and a logo on the side. He didn't need to read what it said. There would be only one thing that would be written there. A serial number, a garage loading bay, maybe even what unit it belonged to. Above all that, though, it'd say one word. Legion.
"This'll be on the news for sure,"
Andrea said, clapping her hands together.
"Can we go do an interview? I always see the after stuff on the news when I visit somewhere, never during. I promise not to mention that I'm your personal secretary and that we're sleeping together."
After a moment, Andrea tilted her head to the side, looking at him.
"Do you think they like pancakes?"
Chapter 31. Outplayed. "Let's nod and say we did." Felix started flipping through the monitors and feeds in his helmet. A blueprint had been shared on the warnet. their version of a privatized shared working space for information. That and more info was being quickly drawn in and hostiles counted and placed. The drones were earning their keep, and then some. A light on the inside corner of his helmet turned on. It was a deep red color, the kind that screamed warning without the word. Felix focused on it, and a screen came up. One of the squads had gotten their drone into the center of the library. There, hunkered down in a sphere of magical energy, were his kids. There were wounded amongst them, but it looked like everyone was there. A man was pounding on that shield, his fists glowing red with each strike. On the opposite side, someone was firing a never-ending stream of rifle rounds into it, pausing only to reload and shove a new magazine home. Before he could say anything, the screen he was looking at was forcibly changed as Ioana began documenting orders there. Flipping back to the overview of the library, Felix watched as a super with speedster powers moved around the library. The tactically loaded super stopped at each squad, handed over what looked like a black piece of sheet metal with handles, and left for the next group. As if it was by designation, a member from each squad ended up with that black piece of metal and moved to the front of the group. A timer began ticking down in the corner of the warnet from 2 minutes. Felix looked away from that, focusing his view towards what was actually happening around him. He caught the eye of the telematic team lead and then crooked a finger. "We have eyes on the kids," Felix said as the woman came in close. "I'm betting you can't go through as long as that shield is up?"
"That's correct, sir. We can't through barriers if they're sealed up."
"Okay. I want your people familiar with the location, and be ready to bounce in, grab one, then bounce out if that shield goes down. Be ready as soon as possible, because we have no idea how long that thing will hold. Lily builds them tough, but it can only take so much. Use the monitor feed to familiarize yourself. Got it?" The team lead nodded her head.
"Yes, sir. We won't fail you."
Turning his head back to the screens, Felix accessed his helmet feed and routed it back to the warnet. At 1 minute, the timer turned yellow. The 2 long-range wardens opened up, their railguns coughing out their high-powered rounds. Drones recorded several kills before everyone took cover inside. The long-range cover kept the windows clear. At 15 seconds, the shield wardens sprinted forward. Several of the hostiles tried to return to the window, only to be driven back. Both melee wardens reached the walls before the timer hit 0. Not stopping there, both wardens began scaling the building. Nimble as a spider, they leaped from window to the top. Reaching the end of the countdown, the squads moved up. That black sheet metal was gone now, and in its place was a tall and wide shield. Angled at the sides, it would protect and block an entire squad on approach. Held by the point position, it was supported by another person on each side. The glow of magic infused it. The shields weren't needed, though. The squads reached the entry points without resistance. A 10-second timer popped up in the corner as the last squad made it to their assigned position. The shield wardens on top, now positioned in opposite corners, brought their swords down into the roof. Withdrawing their weapons, each reached into a pod on their side and pulled out what could only be a grenade. At 5 seconds, they pulled the pins and dropped them into the holes they'd made. The wardens on the outskirts began firing into the windows, if only to force people to keep their heads down. Once more at 0, the squads moved in. Doors were battered aside and the teams began to enter. They cleared the entry lobby, checked corners, and began a systematic sweep of the building. On top of the building, the shield wardens burst through the roof. They would be clearing their way down. To Felix, it was mind-numbing and hard to follow. Instead, he focused in on the children. The shield was still up, but flickering with each strike from the super-strength goon who was pounding on it. Then the shield went down. Before Felix could even think about yelling out, the telemedics were there, teleporting in and out in the blink of an eye. In the telematic loading area, the kids popped into existence, being ferried here as quickly as his people could manage, as fast as they could. Before the brute could think to attack the kids, they were all gone, whisked away at the moment the shield failed. Expanding the telematics is now a definite. Yep, lots more. Felix couldn't stop the smirk that spread across his face. Disconnecting himself from the feed, as there wasn't much he could add and he doubted there'd be much left to do, he moved over to the kids. Sifting through them, he quickly found Eva and Lucian in one corner. Both appeared whole and healthy, which meant Lily wouldn't murder him.
Felix!
Eva said, seeing his approach.
You came!
Of course I did. Hard to be your legal guardian if I don't take care of you. Everything all right?
Yeah,
she said, looking to the others. Those who were wounded were already receiving treatment on site. Those who needed immediate attention were ported off back to home base, he imagined.
They stormed the school, demanded to know where we were. They shot the principal when he wouldn't tell them what class we were in. That's what we heard, at least.
Felix suddenly felt poorly about how he'd treated the principal. They were looking for you, specifically? He asked.
Yeah, they were.
All right. Sounds like we need to open a school of our own, then, Felix said with a sigh. He couldn't leave the kids out in the open like this if they were going to be targeted. I'm so tired of only reacting to their attacks. This needs to end. Now.
I think this is over. I'll head back with the first group and start talking to the kids. Make the entire department available to talk to people,
Kit said. Honestly, Felix had almost forgotten she was there with how quiet she was. Sounds like a plan. Thanks, Kit. I appreciate it. Felix turned his head towards her. He tried out a smile, only to remember that she couldn't see into his helmet. She gave him a smile and a casual wave of her hand. Then, pressing a hand to Eva's shoulder, she guided her away from the group. She led her over to the telemedic party where she began talking to them.
Kit's nice. She says she likes talking to me because I speak my mind,
Andrea said, taking several steps forward. She leaned down and started to fiddle with the ground, her fingers pushing into the soft dirt. I can imagine. Felix turned back to the monitors, watching his people sweep and clear the library.
Smells funny,
Andrea said. Looking over, he found that Andrea was digging like a dog now, sending handfuls of dirt behind her. What does? He asked.
The ground. It smells like...
Andrea paused, considering her words. Felix noticed out of the corner of his eye the moment the telemedics took Kit and the children back to headquarters.
Like explosives,
Andrea said, recapturing his attention. As his eyes flicked back to Andrea, she held something up in one hand. Then it blew up. Everything blew up. All Felix knew was fire, the sound of detonations, and tremendous forces buffeting him. He could see nothing. He could hear nothing. He felt nothing. That wasn't quite accurate. He could feel pain. A lot of pain. He just couldn't feel anything besides that. Which means I'm at least alive. Felix managed to lift an arm, then the other. Am I blind, or... Reaching up with both hands, Felix tried to unclasp his helmet. Fumbling blindly with unfeeling fingers, it wasn't an easy task. It was damn near impossible, really. Eventually, he managed to get the locking clasp open, then rotate the lock and pull the helmet free. Blinking, he tried in vain to clear his vision. Acrid smoke and dust hung in the air all around him. The smell of blood was overwhelming, and the low sound of moans gave everything a surreal, hellish feeling. Rolling to one side, Felix came face to face with the mangled remains of Andrea. Most of her head was missing, as was a good portion of her chest and one arm. There was no life there in the remaining eye. Even her powers of regeneration wouldn't help there. It was directed regeneration to help keep points down. Shuddering away from that, Felix sat up quickly, then threw up all over his leg plates. Spitting a chunk of digested food into the grass, Felix started to slowly rise to his feet. Taking a moment to steady himself, Felix allowed himself to look around. Ioana was there, the lower half of her body simply gone. Her hands were pressed into her guts as if she had tried to hold herself together in her last moments. His stomach rose up as if to try and empty itself again. Turning his back on his dead war maiden, he distanced himself a little. Lying in the grass, fetched up behind a monitor, was Victoria. Every inch of exposed skin was blistered and cracked with burns. Her hair was just gone. She looked alive, though. Her chest rose and fell slowly. Nearby, he saw the remains of several others, all dead and decimated. Reaching down, he gently shook Victoria's shoulder. Her eyes cracked open, then closed. Grudgingly, they opened again, as a groan escaped Victoria's lips.
"It hurts,"
she hissed. "At least you're alive. Can you get up?" Felix asked. He left her alone, looking around for other survivors. Here and there, people were going through the wreckage and bodies. Victoria somehow got to her feet, looking more akin to something that had been flash-fried.
"I think you took the blast, but the fire went around you,"
she ground out between burnt lips.
"I can't feel most of my fingers. I think the nerves are burnt."
"They probably are. Don't worry. I can fix you after this."
"Can you fix them?"
Victoria asked, one hand indicating Ioana and Andrea. "So long as they said yes in their HR documentation, and that I have enough points to do it. I'm not sure, and I really don't want to look right now, but I'm betting I lost a good number of points."
"Oh,"
Victoria said, one hand drawing her sword and flexing around the hilt experimentally. "It also means I really can't afford to spend any points until I know what's going on. Sorry, Victoria. I'd fix you right now, but I have no idea what we'll be up against here. I mean, for all I know, we're still under attack." People were forming squads and teams to begin rounding up the wounded and then triaging them. Ioana's people were trained well. Very well. Even if she isn't here to lead them.
"That's fine. I do the same. What do we do now, though?"
Victoria asked, sheathing her sword. "Contact the telemedics. Get them out here. Felix's wrist started buzzing softly, interrupting him. Lifting up his hand, he looked at the scratched and fizzing display. "Kit's calling," Felix said apologetically. He had to tap the icon several times before it recognized he was trying to accept the call.
"Felix, what's going on? The telemedics are saying they can't get back to you. There's a magical barrier between them and your location."
"We were attacked. An explosion. Everything blew up. Everything. Ioana's dead. So is Andrea. I don't even know where to start."
"I'll send people over immediately. We'll get this sorted out and then—"
Kit stopped mid-sentence. Felix could hear someone telling her something in the background. There was a pause.
"Felix, we're under attack here. I'll do what I can to hold them off, but we're seriously understaffed. We'll do all we can."
"Kit, they've already gotten through the security hallway. They'll be here in a second. We need to go,"
shouted a voice.
"I'll call you when I can. Be safe,"
Kit said, then disconnected. Felix let his arm fall down to his side. They played us. They brought us here deliberately. Deliberately so they could cause the most damage without us being able to resist. And now that that phase is done, they're attacking HQ. We walked right into this, Felix muttered. Victoria grimaced, her burnt, hairless face scrunching up.
"What's the call?"
she asked him. Felix sighed and shook his head. He wasn't a warrior, no combatant. He was a glorified CEO at best.
"Felix, you need to give everyone orders,"
Victoria said softly, for his ears alone. Looking around, he realized a few people had started to turn towards him, waiting, watching. Steeling his resolve, he held up a hand above his head for a few seconds, gathering his wits and what he wanted to say. "Protect and gather the wounded. Provide medical treatment as best as you're able to. Get them into a building for shelter and let no one on the school grounds, though I'm doubting anyone will show up. I'm betting everyone was paid off." Several heads nodded at that. "Beyond that, gather our dead. Try to get as much of their body as you can. Don't start doing that till all our wounded are taken care of, though. Prioritize those who are alive, but let's not neglect our dead." Felix looked around himself to make sure everyone had heard him and had no questions. "Spread the word," he said, dropping his arm. Dropping down to Andrea's side, he stared at her dead face. This wasn't the first Andrea Prime. She'd suffered quite badly in her knowledge of not being the original Andrea. He imagined a third Andrea Prime would only make that worse. A piece of light-colored fabric lay nearby. It was about the size of what had probably been a t-shirt. Snatching at it, he laid it flat on the grass. Taking a breath, Felix then haltingly dipped his finger into the ruins of Andrea's rib cage. Taking his blood-stained finger, he began writing on the fabric. Do not absorb. This is prime. Eyeing the work, he felt like it'd have to do. Then he carefully took the stained canvas and wrapped it around the upper half of Andrea's remains. Any other would be sure to see it and read it first. He hoped it would convey the message clearly enough. Looking to Victoria, he shook his head, not quite sure what to do next. Then his mind kicked into gear and went back to his previous thought. I'm so tired of only reacting to their attacks. This needs to end. Now. Get your gear. We're taking an armored car back to HQ. Felix turned and started off towards the front of the school. Tossing his broken helmet to one side, he realized it was time to act. Time to do something. Anything. Rather than sit around and wait for others to act.
We should have washed your armor,
Victoria said as they cranked the armored car into gear and down the main street leading in. Probably. But at this point I didn't want to waste time on smelling fresh. Need to get home and help if we can. They're under attack. An armored car showing up in your flank is a good way to get your shit kicked in, I'm betting. Felix pulled the shifter into gear and looked around through the portholes. Behind him, the other armored cars were heading into the grounds to take up defensive positions and protect everyone. Up ahead, Felix saw ever more proof that they'd been outplayed and set up. Armed enemies behind a barricade of cars, preventing anyone from driving in or out. Angling the front of the vehicle at a spot between two vehicles, he floored the engine. Bullets began pinging off the armored front. After a second, it went from a light rain sound to a hailstorm to rival that of an angry god. His foes had underprepared on this one point, though. All the arms they had didn't seem as if they had enough power to penetrate the armor of the vehicle. They hadn't counted on actual armored vehicles. With a deafening crash and a jolt, Felix smashed into the makeshift barrier. Twisted metal and sparks showered everyone nearby in wreckage as the cars were torn asunder and pushed to the side. Holding tight to the wheel, Felix wrestled with the behemoth to keep it straight. The wheels bounced and shuddered one way, and then the other, the vehicle careening off as it broke through. Fishtailing wildly, the rear end cracked against another car before it evened out. With the pedal still pressed to the floor, they began to accelerate away. Get back there and take a peek through that rear hatch. In fact, maybe get into that gunner seat and get that turret spun round, Felix called to Victoria.
What? You want me to use the turret?
Sure as hell isn't there for decoration. What are they going to do? Shoot back? They already did.
What about the police?
If they're not responding to an explosion, I'm betting they're not responding to anything today. Victoria sat there for a second. Then she got up and went to the back. One of the lights on the complicated dash turned red and started flashing. Giving it his attention for a moment, he realized it was a safety switch. Thumbing it quickly, it turned a solid red. The moment it did, the turret came to life, the chattering of rounds being fired out of the beefy cannon echoing throughout the hull. The clatter of brass tinkled over the top and sides of the vehicle. It didn't take long for Victoria's sustained fire rate to become the trained burst fire that Andrea had drilled into everyone. Dreading the results, and with a great trepidation, Felix activated his point screen. Daily allotment. Received, 150. Spent, 0. Remaining, 150. Miyu Miki. Received, 1,000. Spent, 0. Remaining, 1,000. Miyu Miki, direct reports. Received, 4,150. Spent, 0. Remaining, 4,150. Ioana Iliescu. Received, 0. Spent, 0. Remaining, 0. Ioana Iliescu, direct reports. Received, 3,050. Spent, 0. Remaining, 3,050. Kit Carrington. Received, 3,000. Spent, 0. Remaining, 3,000. Kit Carrington, direct reports. Received, 8,600. Spent, 0. Remaining, 8,600. Lillian Lux. Received, 3,100. Spent, 0. Remaining, 3,100. Lillian Lux, direct reports. Received, 7,100. Spent, 0. Remaining, 7,100. Andrea Elex. Received, 0. Spent, 0. Remaining, 0. Felicia Fay. Received, 1,550. Spent, 0. Remaining, 1,550. Felicia Fay, direct reports. Received, 11,808. Spent, 0. Remaining, 11,808. Eva Adelpha. Received, 1,600. Spent, 0. Remaining, 1,600. Loyalty bonus. Received, 1,010. Spent, 0. Remaining, 1,010. Daily total. Received, 46,118. Spent, 0. Remaining, 46,118. He didn't have enough points. A single resurrection took 50,000. No one would be coming back from the dead until they could get more points, and there wouldn't be more purchases without their assets being unlocked. Suddenly, everything was falling apart, and Felix didn't know if he could fix it. Chapter 32. Gear Check.
They pulled back after I got the lead car,
Victoria shouted from behind him. Great! Keep it that way. Feel free to fire on whoever or whatever. Felix wedged himself between the cars in front of him and nudged a car out of the way with his armored bumper. Forcing himself through the traffic, Felix slowed down to look both ways and then ran the red light at full speed. No cops stopped them, traffic was light, and there were no fire trucks or ambulances either. That wasn't normal. Too quiet. The city knew something was going on, and to him it seemed as if the emergency responders had all been bribed into silence. Bribed and scared into non-interference. There would be no help from anyone outside of Legion. You know what? Fine. Fine. Suits me just fine. Means I don't have to worry about getting arrested when I run people over. Fuck this. Fuck them. Fuck everyone. Felix growled and bounced up over a curb and started driving on the sidewalk. Everyone out to get us? Fine. I'll be out to get everyone. Everyone who isn't on our side is my enemy. Mailboxes, benches, and trash cans were crushed or knocked aside.
Are we on the sidewalk?
Victoria screeched. Instead of answering, Felix dropped the pedal, the engine roaring as it rushed forward. Sidewalks didn't have traffic. At least, nothing that could stop or slow him. The drive was uneventful, if you discounted running red lights, crushing things, and generally causing enough chaos to make a certain video game named for stealing a car raise an eyebrow. It wasn't until they turned onto the street where the front of their HQ stood that things changed. Certainly not for the better, either. There were bodies all over the entryway, packed bloody and deep. Blood, body parts, corpses, and weapons. Felix was looking out through the viewing ports and found no one moving. A grave, he muttered.
Stay here,
Victoria commanded. She drew her sword and exited the rear hatch, closing it behind herself. Not bothering to argue with her, Felix watched the burnt and injured Victoria move amongst the bodies. She watched both the corpses and her surroundings, picking through and making sure of her foot placement. She eventually disappeared through the front door into the lobby. Fidgeting, Felix did his best to keep calm and aware of his surroundings. Sitting out here didn't help his anger and annoyance. The problem was, the moment his mind found a quiet place, it went straight back to the fact that so many people were dead. His rage would flame up like a stoked bed of coals, and he had to force himself to remain seated. It felt like he was missing something, on top of everything else. At least Andrea's not gone. If I can't revive the Prime, I could at least have an other absent... Felix's train of thought stopped dead. Feeling his breath catch, he called up his point screen again. Andrea Elex. Received, 0. Spent, 0. Remaining, 0. Daily total. Received, 45,793. Spent, 0. Remaining, 45,793. She's at 0. That means her others are gone too, right? Felix asked softly to no one. Even Andrea, then. The legendary myriad. That must have been a lot of explosives to manage to bag every single other. Thinking back on it, it really had been a huge amount of explosives. Most of the school had been leveled. In fact, he could have sworn he'd had 46,000 points earlier. My wounded are dying. People are still dying. Victoria reappeared at the entry to the lobby and waved him in. Exiting via the hatch, Felix did all he could to not look at the bodies. He knew he'd find some of his own people in there. Or at least he thought he would. That'd be more than enough to keep his eyes up and forward for now.
Hurry up! She doesn't have much time.
What? Felix squawked in confusion. Picking up his pace, he entered the lobby and followed along behind Victoria. Turning the corner into the security hall, he got his answer. Miu was propped up against a wall. Blood stained her lips and jaw. It also covered her chest and stomach as if she'd thrown up on herself. Her eyes turned up to see him approach, a weak, bloody smile crossing her lips. It was one of the few smiles from Miu he'd have called real. Not the fake mask she put on for others.
Felix, you're alive.
Hey, Miu, just hang on and we'll get you fixed up. Miu shook her head and then coughed violently, blood gushing out from her mouth. It was a fountain of bright red vomit.
No. They're after you. Want you dead. Won't stop. Took Kit. Activate Wraith's receiver. Ordered him to follow. Follow Wraith,
Miu said. She took a slow, deep breath. Then her head slowly lolled to the side as she exhaled. Her eyes locked to a point somewhere above his head as her body went still. Miu? Felix asked, getting down in front of her. There was no response. Mentally focusing on her, he tried to call up the correction window to correct her condition, make her healthy again. Status correction. Dead to living and healthy. Correct status, 65,000 points. The accept button was grayed out, of course. He didn't have that kind of points available to him. I can't fix her. I don't have enough points to resurrect her, let alone resurrect her and fix her. I don't... Felix trailed off, staring at Miu's lifeless face.
Felix, we'll get through this, but I really need you to get a hold of yourself,
Victoria said, getting in close to his side.
You're the only one who can bring everyone back, but only if we make it through this.
Felix gritted his teeth and turned his head away from Victoria and Miu both. She was right. Absolutely right. Didn't you hear her? They want me dead. That's the goal. They won't stop till it happens, which means we have to kill them first. So that's what we do. Kill them all. Swallowing, he got to his feet. Reactions weren't going to win the day. Actions were. Bold, direct actions. If they're not with me, they're against me. Standing up, Felix went to the elevator. He knew what he needed to do. What he wanted to do. And it'd go his way, or he'd die trying. Victoria stood at his side, her sword back in its sheath. She'd become his shadow and support. He'd not forget it. Remind me to make you incredibly deadly after this.
I will. I also signed my form. If Ioana doesn't kick your ass, I will.
Noted. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open. Inside was a mess of blood and gore, staining the walls, ceiling, floor, everything. It was like someone had dropped a body into a giant blender. Standing at the center of that blender with energy crackling all around her was Lily. Power undulated across her body back and forth. She was coated liberally and painted red. Her clothes were ripped, torn, burnt, and hanging on her by sheer will and a few threads. Seeing him and Victoria, she let the blue storm of death wink out.
"Felix, you're alive,"
Lily said, her lips twitching as if she wanted to smile, but didn't have the energy for it. Alive and angry. I'm going to go get my toys, Felix said, stepping into the elevator. He stepped in close to Lily and waited for Victoria.
"Toys?"
asked the sorceress. My toys, Felix said. Reaching over, he thumbed the button for the research and development floor. The very floor where Mr. White worked on weapons, and Felicia was building his personal warden. Nice look, by the way. Real post-apocalypse flavor.
"Oh? Does that suit your tastes? Dream of a fantasy world where you keep a harem of sex slaves?"
Lily asked, her tone changing, gaining a touch of her usual teasing self. Pfft, sounds like a teenage fantasy. Give myself a good strong name like Vince and run around a continent sleeping with slave women.
"Of course. Can't forget that you'd be a hero, though, protecting all those women."
Felix snorted. Then again, that'd be pretty awesome. If I had to pick an alternate life. Lily slapped him behind the head.
"Stop thinking about it. You have enough on your plate."
Grinning, he let it drop. Going through the normal security quickly, Felix was happy to see everything looked normal, which meant Felicia and Mr. White would be safe and sound. Safe and sound and ready to help him get prepped. When he finally opened the lab door, he was almost beyond relieved to find several squads of Miu's internal security forces waiting for him. Guns drawn and pointing in his direction, but still waiting.
"Felix?"
Felicia called out from behind a console. Beside her was Mr. White, his hands clutching a pistol leveled at Felix's chest. To the rear of the room were both their teams, waiting for directions and pressed together, looking much akin to a flock of nervous sheep in white coats. Yup. Here to pick up some goodies, then go take the fight back to these bastards. Get Kit back as well and end this whole thing. Rather than waiting for her to ask, he'd get it out ahead. Maybe it'd help strengthen her resolve. They killed Ioana, Andrea, and Miu. I mean to return it back to them. Felicia started to blink rapidly, her throat flexing, her face twisting.
"Did you bring her back? Ioana?"
she asked curtly. Can't yet. Can't bring anyone back. Not enough points. After we kick the shit out of them, I'm going to rob everything they own, take slaves, make sausages, and get more points. Then get everyone back who signed the form. Felix shuddered, his entire body shivering for a second with the amount of anger he held. Everyone, he said, emphasizing the point. Felicia nodded her head quickly, then brushed her hand across her eyes.
"Good. Ioana signed the form to come back. She'd kick your ass the moment you died, you daft fucker, if you didn't bring her back."
Felix chuckled at that. Yeah, she would. Down to hell and back up. Now, let's see how far you got with my warden. I want to get it moving, even if I have to spend today's points to do it. Then we're going to do the same with your weapons, Mr. White. Felix gave them both a tight smile. Then I'm going to go pay a house call. Everyone on their teams turned to face a corner of the room. One of the walls there was clearly a sliding wall. Mr. White gave Felix a considering look, then moved back to that wall. He grabbed a hold of it and heaved it to one side. Felix, Victoria, and Lily stood staring at what lay inside. There stood a black and red warden unit. It had a similar look and feel to the others, but it was clearly different. It had the look of both versions in regards to utility and defensive capabilities, but more. All around it and mounted to the walls were various weapons that looked as if they'd been designed specifically for this unit.
"It's got all the same gear of the earlier models. Half the weight, though, so double the battery capacity on a normal battery. Mr. White and his team helped fix a few other battery design problems, so you've got quadruple the power output of the traditional units on top of needing less,"
Felicia said generously, even waving a hand at the man as she came up to stand beside Felix.
Yes. We've taken all the different projects and combined them. The energy output is considerable and can recharge itself to a degree. So we built an energy weapon to hook into the unit. It can put out enough power to punch through 6-inch steel. In addition, we put together a standard armament set for you since your weapon uses energy. No need to carry ammo, so we use the space for other things.
Standard armament? Felix asked. Energy pistol, high-explosive grenades, flashbangs, a hand axe Felicia made that she assures me will go through steel, and other things. Those are the big ones, though. Felix blew out a breath and looked to Felicia. So, what's wrong?
The wiring. It's not done, and it won't be any time soon. It's a complicated mess of electronics with some intense shielding, said the dwarf.
It'll take a few days of dedicated resources, Mr. White added. Felix instead focused on the unit and the fact that he wanted it ready to go per Mr. White's and Felicia's standards. Equipment: Legion's Fist. Build-out complete. Warden unit will be completed per specifications. Upgrade: 25,000. Felix hit the accept button and sat down on the ground to start pulling off his boots. Help me get dressed for this. People to slaughter. As to all of you, I'm willing to take whoever wants to go, but realize, if you fall, there's no guarantee I can bring you back. I mean, that's my goal, but at this time, I'm not able to.
I'm going,
Victoria said.
I'll be in the armory. As will I.
Lily agreed. She patted Felix on the top of the head and left with Victoria. All 3 squads volunteered as well, and promptly went to join the ladies in the armory. Getting up in nothing but his undershirt and skivvies, Felix clapped his hands together. All right, let's get my stupid ass into Legion's Fist here so I can go kill people. You're no soldier, Felix, said one of the techs as another keyed the warden to open the cockpit. No, I'm not. But even I can aim a rifle. Felix turned around and backed up into the warden. Stepping into the cockpit, he slid his legs into place, then his arms. Is your aim any good? Asked the same technician. Guess we'll find out how much first-person shooters carry over to real life. Felix placed the back of his head into the helmet. Close it up! There was no response to his command, but the warden whirred to life. The cockpit began to close up around him, the helmet coming down into place around his head. In front of his face, 4 displays came to life. 3 provided him with his front and peripheral cameras, with the 4th giving him a rear view. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Please confirm external microphones picking up audio, someone said.
Reading you,
Felix confirmed. He shifted himself as the harness began to tighten up around him. After a few seconds, he felt like he was held firmly in place. Testing communication system. We're also releasing the servos. Do you know how to pilot it? That'd be a tech manning a console nearby. Felix turned his head to focus the camera on the individual. As if he were moving his own body, the warden moved.
I hear you, and I'm sure I'll figure it out. No time like the present.
Most of the controls will be reading the signals in your brain to help coordinate the movements of your body. You'll notice the longer you're in there, the better it'll get. Learning mode should be complete within 2 hours, or depending on how much you use it.
Anything else?
It utilizes all the same cues your Mark II did. Use the warnet just as you did previously.
Right.
Stepping out of the loading bay, Felix had the impression that he could move freely. There was no delay from his body's commands to the movement of the small mech. Looks like everything is running smoothly. Any questions? Felix turned towards the arsenal and pulled down the energy rifle. There was a connection port and locking mechanism that the warden's hand fit into perfectly. With a pop, his HUD changed, turning red. A crosshair in the top left of the screen came to life. In the top right, the silhouette of his energy rifle and an energy bar showed up. Pulling the rifle up to his shoulder, the crosshair changed its location, matching up with the direction of the rifle.
2 questions. Where is Wraith's tracker, and how do I get out of the lab? Time is money.
Felix pulled the rifle's muzzle up and held it against his shoulder. He was ready. Now, if only his opponents weren't, this would be a lot easier. Chapter 33. High Voltage. He'd taken the 4 wardens after finding out they had survived the blast. They'd only needed a minimal amount of re-equip and repair, and would meet them at the location once ready. In addition to that, he'd taken all 3 of the internal security squads from HQ. With Victoria and Lily, that completed his small army, and they'd set off for Wraith's location marker. Felix was looking at the WarNet virtual map. He was slowly going over all the notations and markers that his people had been adding as they scouted the area. Looking up to his screens, he tried to imagine the map overlay with the actual layout. They'd ended up at a large, sprawling farm. An actual farm on the outskirts of the city-state. It had the look of a militia holdout farm, self-sustaining, armed mundanes wandering around on patrol, and paranoid signs disavowing the local government. An organization of supers, mundanes, and others who had targeted him personally, masquerading as an anti-government mundane militia. His long-range wardens had set up in the distance, both providing cover and vision. The melee wardens had been assigned each to a squad, leaving the third one with Felix. Victoria was with Team 1 and Lily with Team 2.
T1, guard change,
crackled the radio in his ear. This was it. They'd only been here for a short time, but they already had a solid idea of what they were walking into. The entire complex was regularly patrolled, but the number of people didn't match how many heat signatures they got from inside, which meant this was much like his own base. Underground.
LF actual, engage and take both. Confirm,
Felix said into his mic.
T1 actual, copy. T2 actual, copy. LF, copy.
Engage.
Felix watched his displays. His people quickly overran the enemy positions. There was no noise, no gunshots.
T1 confirmed. T2 confirmed.
The squad leader for his own group moved ahead now. Felix took up the rear guard and leveled his weapon. The squad fanned out and moved at a quick jog, sweeping and clearing the field as they went. Their goal was the farmhouse wall ahead. There were no windows or overlook to it, which meant the approach was ideal. The 2 closest patrols were built in such a way as to watch the area. When they hit the halfway point, Felix heard his comms pop to life again.
LF, Phase 1 complete. Go Phase 2.
There was no response to the command, but Felix knew they were moving towards the 3rd and 4th guard positions. He couldn't spare a thought to look, as he was making sure he was doing his job. Felix swept his head to the left, then right, confirming that their flanks were still clear. The squad reached the wall and sidled up to it. 4 members of the squad broke off and rushed to each end of the wall.
LF2, west clear. Sight on T1, on engage. LF4, east clear. Sight on T2, post engage.
Felix moved to the wall and squatted down, turning himself into an impromptu ladder. Kneeling, with nothing to do, he pulled up the WarNet. The plan was going accordingly. There were only 2 more patrols that they knew of. Catching them during the guard change would eliminate the most hostiles, but was also the most risky. Then he heard something he didn't want to. Something he dreaded. A gunshot.
T1, shots fired. Post engage.
Felix licked his lips. It wasn't the worst outcome. They'd managed to clear a good number of the patrols before this point. Maybe they didn't hear it.
S1, hive active. Clear shot. Engage.
They heard it. 2 members of his squad had vaulted over him and onto the roof of the building. That was the end of him being a ladder. Turning his face to the wall, Felix took a deep breath.
LF actual, weapons free. Move to final.
As he finished giving the command, Felix burst forward, activating the jump jets. Plowing through the wall, Felix brought his energy rifle up in a low firing position. Wood, cement, and rebar exploded out from his dynamic entry. Stopping dead a foot inside the building, Felix immediately cleared the corner to his left, then swept right. There were 2 doorways. Triggering the communications button for his own squad, he moved to the right. At the same time, he dropped his left hand into the armored ammo pod on his thigh and fished out a grenade.
LF-56, left doorway, 7-8, hold room.
Activating the high-explosive grenade, he tossed it through the left-hand doorway and then focused on the right. 2 men with assault rifles were stepping free of the doorway as Felix centered his crosshair. Pulling the trigger on his rifle, it discharged a brilliant white beam of light. The powerful discharge turned the first man into a flaming pillar before cutting through him. The man behind the first went up in flames next. Before either human torch hit the ground, the grenade Felix had lobbed into the other room went off. Stomping forward, Felix moved towards the right-hand room. With his left hand, he slapped both flaming dead men aside. Entering the next room, Felix acquired a target at the end of the hallway and pulled the trigger briefly. He'd held the trigger down last time. He wanted to see what a quick trigger depress would do. As the bright light of the discharge struck the man, he immediately burst into flame. The energy cut off almost as soon as it touched him, though. The man screamed, dropped his weapon, and ran off down the hallway. Felix started to look into each room as he cleared the hall, making sure there'd be nothing behind him as he went. The chatter of weapons fire behind him alerted him to the fact that his people had encountered resistance. Drawing his energy pistol in his left hand, Felix lifted the weapon and fired it several times into the torso of an unarmed woman trying to get into her clothes. Smoking holes appeared in the woman's chest where the rounds hit her. She dropped to her knees, her eyes widening, then slumped over. Felix dismissed her from his mind and went to the next room, reholstering his pistol. The next two rooms were empty. Felix pulled up short at the exit to the building. Activating his mic, he looked out into the interior of the complex in front of him.
LF Actual, right doorway and adjoining rooms clear.
LF6, left doorway clear. LF5 was KIA.
Felix felt his lips peel back in a grimace. Every life counted right now since he couldn't bring them back.
T1, T2, sit rep.
Felix called into the void.
T1 Actual, final complete. 1 KIA. T2, final complete. Actual +2 KIA.
S1, clear.
S2, clear.
LF Actual, sweep and clear. Find entry.
Felix killed his mic, and then set off to look for the entry.
I don't understand,
Felix said slowly, looking at the corpse of Victoria. A bullet hole marred her forehead, damn near directly in the middle of it.
There was a super in the group. Before he could attack us, she engaged him, killed him. Before we could cover her, someone got a shot off. We dropped him after that first shot, but it was already too late,
said the new leader of Squad 2.
I'm sorry, sir.
Felix took a slow breath, then shook his head.
Don't be. It wasn't your fault. She died doing exactly what she wished. We'll bring her back with us. Take the body somewhere safe and mark the location. We'll pick them up afterwards.
Wraith materialized out of a shadow nearby.
Found the entry. I couldn't get past the first checkpoint without setting things off,
said the shadow.
There's no doubt they know there's something going on up here, but I wasn't sure how you wanted to proceed.
Felix blew a raspberry and then shrugged his shoulders.
Doesn't matter. They do know we're here and are probably expecting an attack. I'll take point. Follow in behind me.
Checking his display, he saw his batteries had recharged 30% of the 50% he'd used. They really had done wonders with this warden, and this was only the first iteration. Tapping the open command for the armored pod on his left hip, he reached in. Using his HUD to verify what was in it, he pulled out the black metal shield his squads had deployed at the school. The metal snapped to his hand at the connection point and then expanded rapidly to its full size, then shrank back down to the starter size. It wouldn't get in his way, and he could activate it quickly. Felix looked to Wraith and nodded his head.
Lead on.
The black shadow that was Wraith flowed back in the other direction. Following along behind, Felix felt his thoughts slide off into a new direction. He had to wonder if this was what it had felt like for his attackers when they'd tried to invade his base the first time around. Both of their attacks had been brute strength with little in the way of coordination or strategy. Could he believe that'd be their response while even on the defensive? He needed actionable intelligence. Wraith oozed up next to a wooden door like one would normally find leading into a basement or root cellar.
Once I get their attention, I need you to phase in and do what you can to cause havoc and figure out where to hit them. I'll be playing distraction. If I can manage to soften them up at the same time, great. Otherwise, I plan on pulling back after an initial probe.
Understood.
Great,
Felix said, and then jumped forward. His feet slammed through the wood and he dropped into a cement-lined tunnel. At the end of the tunnel was a machine gun slit and a big steel door. Bringing his rifle up, he centered the crosshair and held down the trigger. In such an enclosed space, the light put out from the muzzle was blinding. Felix kept the beam flowing for another 3 seconds, moving as fast as he could. It was a fairly narrow tunnel, and his arms were brushing against the walls. His displays filtered out the light quicker than his eyes could have. The machine gun was gone, and the room it was in was a roaring inferno. Reaching for a grenade, he came up against the machine gun position. Pulling the pin, he stuffed the explosive into the slit and then moved back several feet to aim his rifle at the heavy door. He focused his reticle on the point where he assumed the door was bolted or barred on the other side, and then fired. For 5 seconds, the beam weapon unloaded into the door. Then the muffled boom of the grenade going off could be heard. The door gave out, weakened from the extreme heat the energy rifle put out, and then capitulating under the confined explosion of the grenade. Blowing outward, it hung on the frame brokenly. Charging ahead, Felix drew out his pistol, trying to give his rifle a second to cool off. The heat gauge next to the outline had gone from yellow to orange. Slamming the door to the side with his shoulder, Felix scanned the room. There were men and women all over, wounded, dead, dying, all of it. His HUD rapidly marked each target, and Felix lifted his pistol. Methodically, with precision, he shot each one in the head. They were against him. They were the enemy. A woman sat up slowly, her eyes slowly focusing on him. She was beautiful. Felix pressed the tip of his pistol to her forehead and pulled the trigger. The back of her head blew out and splattered her brains all over the wall. Sweeping the room one more time, Felix found no hostiles. Holstering his pistol, he moved towards the hallway that led into the machine gun nest. Dark and without light or noise, it was clearly a trap. Activating the night vision camera, he found it was nothing but an empty concrete hallway. Unfortunately, he couldn't see to the end of the hallway. Taking a breath, Felix leaned up against the wall and trained his rifle on the hallway.
LF actual. Front position secured. T1, move up and hold this position. Detach Mel War 1 and 2 and prepare for assault.
Closing his eyes, he tried to calm himself. The enormity of the situation wanted to overrun him. He was no soldier, no warrior. But I'm a murderer, killing wounded and unarmed people. They were my enemy, though. They were against me. But they didn't even have a chance. His mind flashed back to the confused look the woman had had on her face a moment before her brain had been turned into a microwave dinner. Felix felt his lips tremble, his mouth going dry as his stomach pushed upwards, threatening to make him throw up. Miu, Victoria, Ioana, Andrea. Miu, Victoria, Ioana, Andrea. Doing this to bring them back. Miu, Victoria, Ioana, Andrea. Save Kit. Bring them back. Doing this for them. Felix muttered in the quiet dark of his warden, no one hearing him, no one seeing him. Alone with his thoughts.
You in there?
Lily asked, her finger poking at the camera, getting his attention.
Huh? Yeah,
said Felix. She'd caught him off guard. He hadn't noticed her arrival.
Open up. Let me see you.
Lily folded her arms across the tactical gear she'd put on from the armory.
Lily, I'm fine. If I do the—
Open up.
Her voice was calm, clear, and commanding. There would be no arguments. Felix triggered the opening sequence. The smell of the room hit him in the face. Coppery and rich. The stink of blood was all-encompassing.
Yes. That smell. Remember it. You can never go back from here,
Lily said, pinning him in place in the open cockpit with her glare.
There is no hemming or hawing in this situation. You did this. You killed them. And that's something you have to live with for the rest of your life.
Reaching into the warden, she pressed a cool hand to his face.
But you won't hold that guilt alone. This is to save our people. Your people. You did this with good intentions and a belief that it's what you had to do. It's only death. Death isn't the end. They're all already moving on. I'm afraid I realized that fact after the first time I took someone's soul.
Lily sighed while giving him a bitter smile.
You, on the other hand, Mr. Campbell, have to help me carry my burden as well. I expect to be spoiled.
Felix nodded his head slowly, digesting her words. She was right, of course. In many ways, she probably carried more guilt around than he ever could. Thanks, Lily. You're right. And yeah, I'll do my best to spoil you. Haven't had our first date yet, though. Kinda hard when we keep having to reschedule. Lily's tragic smile turned bright at that. She leaned in and kissed him on the cheek.
I'll make sure to make it memorable then, so it overshadows all the problems we had getting there. Now, button yourself back up and get ready. There's a number of people waiting for us, and we can't keep them waiting, can we?
She leaned back away from him, her eyes glowing in the soft light, her smile truly bringing out her beauty. Then a lightning bolt sprang out of the dark hallway and went into one side of her head and exited the other. Her hair caught fire, her skin crisped, and her ears smoked. Her body locked up into a rigid pose, and then collapsed. In that moment, Lily fell to the ground. All around him, his people opened up with their rifles, firing down the dark hallway. Desperately, agonizingly, Felix pulled at his character screen for Lily. He wanted to make her healthy, put her back to rights. Victoria had been struck by a similar attack and had gone into cardiac arrest. Maybe this would be easier, or fewer points, or... Status correction. Dead to living and healthy. Correct status? 60,000 points. She's dead. Felix stared at the smoldering corpse of Lily. The fire in her hair went out on its own, and all that was left behind was the sickening smell of burnt flesh and hair. Lillian Lux was no more. Chapter 34. Hitting Rock Bottom. Felix stared at Lily as she lay there, unmoving. He didn't understand. It was the same type of attack that had nearly killed Victoria. Why did it kill Lily outright? It's not fair. 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 It's not fair! The warden's cockpit closed up on Felix, and he turned down the hallway. He lifted up the black metal shield and activated it. Setting his feet, he did his best to get into a stable stance. Then he flipped on his jump jets. Leaning forward behind the expanding magical shield, he rocketed down the tunnel.
It's not fair!
Felix screamed. His shield bucked and smashed into his arm as if struck by something. Felix didn't care. His shout carried him onward as the jump jets continued to build up speed down the tunnel. As rapidly as he gained speed, he lost it. All of it. He slammed to a standstill against what he could only assume was the end of the hall. Deactivating his jump jets, he pulled his shield to one side to take a look around it. Smashed between his shield and the wall was the hero who had killed Lily, the damned electrical spawn of the devil. Felix smiled when he realized the man was alive, moaning, breathing heavily, and looking like he'd been hit by a car, but alive. The metal shield flickered and went out, the magical enchantment having been completely spent. Disconnecting the shield and tossing it to one side, Felix hung his rifle on one of his ammo pods. Then he reached out for the hero with both hands. Grabbing him by the arms, Felix got a good hold. Then he yanked his arms apart, one to each side with as much strength as he could. With a sickening crunch and pop, one arm tore off from the man's torso and the other crackled sickeningly and went limp. Flinging the torn arm over his shoulder, Felix pressed his free hand against the man's torso. The man had been screaming since the moment Felix had started. Rather than deal with it, Felix lowered the receiver, then pulled again on the man's remaining arm. With a wet squish, the arm came free. Dropping it to the ground, Felix pushed the dying hero to one side. Pulling his rifle free, Felix stomped over to the door and kicked it in with a single boot strike. His low-light vision flickered on, and he could immediately pick out where the enemies were. Pulling the rifle into position, he began firing quick 1-second-long shots at each hostile. As they were turned into bonfires, they began to return fire at him. The rounds pinged off him, doing little to no damage to the Legion's fist. Felix moved forward, slinging his rifle and pulling a grenade out of his pod. As the men and women around him screamed, burned, and died, he casually stepped amongst them and threw a grenade down the next hall.